For my 70th birthday, my stepdaughter gave me a pair of earbuds. 3 days later, the police walked her out of my house in handcuffs. She thought she was tracking a senile old man. She didn't know she was listening to her own prison sentence being written. Before I tell you how I turned her trap into a weapon, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. 7:14 in the evening. I looked at the clock on the microwave for the 50th time. The brisket I had put in the oven at noon was now sitting on the counter cold and congealed in its own fat. My 70 years on this earth had taught me patience, but they had also taught me about respect. And this was not it. I sat alone at the head of my dining table in my 3-story brick house on the south side of Chicago. This house was the only thing my wife Sarah and I ever argued about. She wanted something smaller. I wanted something solid, something that said we had made it. I paid for every brick of this place with double shifts at the logistics warehouse, moving crates until my back felt like it was made of ground glass. Now the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Finally, the front door opened without a knock. They had keys. For now. Happy birthday, Booker. Chloe breezed in, followed by her husband, Brad. She didn't look at me. She looked at her reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusting her hair. My stepdaughter. The girl I had put through college. The girl who hadn't called me in 6 months unless she needed a cosigner. Sorry we are late, Dad, Brad said, closing the door with his foot. Traffic was a nightmare. Brad was a real estate agent who hadn't sold a house in 2 years. He was wearing a suit that was too tight and a watch that was too expensive for a man with 3 maxed-out credit cards. He didn't look at me either. He was looking at my floors. He walked into the dining room, his eyes scanning the crown molding and the hardwood. You know, Booker, these floors are really starting to buckle near the entrance, Brad said instead of hello. You really should think about the market value. A place this size in this neighborhood could fetch a serious price if you liquidate now before the repairs pile up. I stayed seated. I didn't smile. The food is cold, I said, my voice low. Oh, we ate on the way, Chloe said, waving her hand dismissively. She dropped her purse on the table right next to my empty plate. We didn't think you would actually cook. At your age, standing over a hot stove is dangerous, isn't it? She smiled, but her eyes were cold. It was the same look she gave me when her mother died 3 years ago, the look of someone waiting for their inheritance. We didn't bring a cake, Brad added, pulling out a chair and sitting down without asking. Too much sugar isn't good for your heart anyway, Booker. We have to be careful with you. We need you sticking around. He laughed, but it sounded like dry leaves crunching. He didn't want me sticking around. He wanted me out of the way. I could see it in the way his eyes kept darting to the staircase, calculating how much the second-floor bedrooms would add to the listing price. I looked at them. My family. The people who were supposed to be my legacy. They looked at me and saw a checking account with a pulse. So I said, leaning back in my chair, You came 2 hours late to tell me my house is falling apart and my heart is failing. Is that my present? Chloe sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. Don't be so grumpy, Dad. We brought you something. Something nice. She reached into her oversized designer bag and pulled out a small white box. She slid it across the table. I looked at it. It was wrapped in plastic. Apple AirPods Pro. I frowned. I knew what these cost. $250, maybe more. This was the same woman who gave me a $10 gift card to Dunkin' Donuts last Christmas. A gift card that had 0 balance when I tried to use it. Open it, Chloe urged, leaning forward. Her eagerness was unnatural. Usually she threw a gift at me and went back to texting. Now she was staring at me like a hawk watching a mouse. I don't need these, I said, pushing the box back slightly. I have a radio. I like my jazz on the radio. It is not about music, Booker Brad interjected. It is about safety. It is about staying connected. You are 70 now. You live alone in this big old museum. What if you fall? What if you need us? I picked up the box. It felt heavy. Not physically heavy, but heavy with intention. In my 30 years managing inventory at the warehouse, I developed a sixth sense for things that didn't add up. When a shipment arrived too early or a manifest had too many corrections, my neck would itch. My neck was itching now. Thank you, I said, testing them. I will figure out how to set them up later. No. Chloe practically shouted. She reached out and snatched the box from my hand. Her nails were long and painted blood red. You will never figure it out, Dad. Technology is a nightmare these days. Let me do it for you. Where is your phone? I hesitated. My phone was an older iPhone, but it worked fine. It had my life in it, photos of Sarah, messages from my old union buddies. "I can do it, Chloe," I said, reaching for the box. "Just give me the phone, Booker," Brad said, his voice dropping an octave. "Stop being stubborn. She is trying to do something nice for you." The room went quiet. I looked at Brad. He was smiling, but his jaw was tight. This wasn't a request. It was a demand. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it and slid it across the mahogany table. "Fine," I said. "Show me." Chloe grabbed the phone and the earbuds. She didn't open the box like someone excited to share a gift. She opened it with surgical precision. She tore the plastic, popped the lid, and pulled the earbuds out. Then she started tapping on my phone screen. Fast. Too fast. I sat there watching her fingers fly. Pairing a Bluetooth device takes 10 seconds. You open the case, you hit connect. Done. Chloe had been tapping for 2 minutes. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to lean over to see the screen. She pulled the phone back against her chest, shielding it from my view. "Just updating some settings, Dad. Your iOS is ancient." God, how do you even live like this? Nothing is optimized. Optimized. That was a warehouse word. You optimize routes to save fuel. You optimize storage to fit more crates. You don't optimize a father unless you plan to ship him out. Here, Brad said, distracting me. He stood up and walked to the window, tapping on the glass. "You see this condensation, Booker? That means your seals are blown. That is going to be a $5,000 fix. You really don't have the cash flow for that, do you? Not on a pension." I ignored him. My eyes were on Chloe. She was biting her lower lip, a habit she had since she was a teenager whenever she was lying. Finally, she handed the phone back. "There," she said, letting out a breath. "All set. I put the earbuds in the case. You just put them in your ears and they work like magic." She stood up abruptly. "Well, we have to run. Dinner reservation." "You just got here," I said, looking at the cold brisket. "We just wanted to drop off the gift, Dad. Happy birthday. Really." Chloe leaned down and gave me a hug. It was loose and quick. She smelled of expensive perfume and nervous sweat. Brad clapped me on the shoulder. His hand was heavy. "Enjoy 70, Booker. It is a milestone. Make sure you use the earbuds. We want to know you are safe." And just like that, they were gone. The front door clicked shut, and I heard the engine of Brad's leased BMW roar to life outside. I sat in the silence of my empty house. The clock on the microwave read 7:30. I looked at the white plastic case on the table. Then I picked up my phone. It was warm. Not just warm from being held, it was hot. The back of the casing felt like it had been running a marathon. I frowned. I tapped the screen to wake it up. The battery icon in the top right corner was yellow. 20%. That was impossible. I had charged it to 100% before I put the brisket in the oven. I hadn't used it all afternoon. Phones don't lose 80% of their battery in 5 hours sitting on a table, unless they are working, unless they are processing something massive in the background. I unlocked the screen. It felt sluggish. I swiped between pages and the frame stuttered. My logistics brain kicked into high gear. In the warehouse, if a forklift battery died halfway through a shift, it meant someone was using it off the books, or the load was heavier than the manifest declared. Energy does not disappear. It is consumed. Something was consuming my phone. I looked at the earbuds again. Chloe said she was updating settings. She said she was optimizing. I put the phone down on the table and stared at it like it was a bomb. I am not a tech genius. I can use email and I can check the weather, but I know people, and I knew my daughter. Chloe wouldn't spend 5 minutes setting up a device for me unless it benefited her. I stood up and walked to the window. The taillights of their car were disappearing down the street. They were probably laughing right now, probably talking about the floors, about the nursing home, about the money. My heart started to hammer in my chest, not from fear, but from a cold rising anger. They thought I was old. They thought I was slow. They thought I was just inventory waiting to be written off. I picked up the earbuds case and shoved it into my pocket. Then I grabbed the hot phone. I wasn't going to eat the brisket. I wasn't going to sleep. I grabbed my keys and my jacket. I needed to see Jamal. He was a young kid who worked the night shift at the logistics center. Smart kid, computer engineering degree, but working the warehouse to pay off student loans. He always told me if I ever had tech trouble to come see him. I walked out the door and locked it tight. As I walked to my old Ford truck parked in the driveway, I put one of the earbuds in my ear. It chimed. A pleasant, crisp sound. Connected, a robotic voice whispered, I didn't say anything. I just started the truck. If they wanted to be connected, we would be connected. But they were about to learn that when you plug into a high voltage line without checking the current first, you don't get power. You get burned. I backed out of the driveway and headed toward the industrial district. The night was just beginning, and so was the war. The next morning I went to the only place that made sense to me, the warehouse. Retirement is a funny thing. Everyone tells you to look forward to it, but nobody tells you that silence is the loudest sound in the world. I still did consulting work for the logistics center in South Chicago 3 days a week. I didn't need the check. I needed the noise. I needed the beep of forklifts in reverse and the smell of diesel and cardboard. I needed to feel useful. I walked into the break room at 10 o'clock. Jamal was there typing furiously on a laptop that looked like it had survived a war zone. Jamal is 26 years old. He is the lead IT engineer for the facility. Smart kid, sharp eyes. He reminds me of myself 40 years ago, but with a keyboard instead of a wrench. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, Booker. You are moving slow today. Old age finally catching up with you." He was joking. We had that kind of relationship. I sat down and poured coffee from my thermos. "Not today, Jamal. Just tired. Had a birthday dinner last night." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the white plastic case. I placed it on the scratched metal table between us. I admit I wanted to show it off. Not because I loved the object, but because I wanted to prove to Jamal, and maybe to myself, that my family actually cared. "Check this out," I said. "Gift from the stepdaughter. AirPods Pro." Jamal whistled. "Fancy. Chloe actually spent money. That is a headline right there." I laughed, but it was a weak sound. She even set them up for me. Said my phone was too old to handle the pairing process, so she did some optimization. Jamal stopped typing. His hands froze over the keyboard. He looked at the case, then at me. "Optimization," he repeated. His voice had changed. The playful tone was gone. "Yeah." Said she had to update some settings. Jamal pushed his laptop aside. "Let me see your phone." "Booker." I handed it to him. He didn't ask for the passcode. He knew it. He had helped me set up my email 6 months ago. He unlocked the phone and tapped the settings icon. I watched his face. Usually Jamal has a poker face. He plays chess on his lunch break and beats guys twice his age, but right now his eyebrows were knitting together. He swiped down to the control center. Then he went into the Bluetooth menu. Then the privacy settings. His skin is dark, but I swear I saw him go pale. He took a deep breath and looked around the break room to make sure we were alone. "Booker, are you wearing these right now?" "No," I said. "They are in the case." "Good. Keep them in the case." He turned the phone screen toward me. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, pointing to a small icon in the status bar. It was a little green arrow. "That means location," I said. "I use maps." Jamal shook his head. "No, Booker. That means your location is being shared. Indefinitely." He tapped on the Find My app. A map of Chicago popped up. There was a blue dot pulsing right where we sat. And underneath it, 2 faces. Chloe and Brad. "It says here you are sharing your location with them permanently," Jamal said. "They can see where you are every second of the day. They can see when you leave the house. They can see when you stop at the bank. They can see how long you stay at the doctor." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "She said it was for safety," I muttered, trying to defend a lie I already knew was indefensible, in case I fall. Jamal didn't answer. He tapped another menu. Accessibility. Then, hearing devices. "This is the bad part, Booker. Look at this." He pointed to a feature called Live Listen. It was toggled to on. I squinted at the screen. What is Live Listen? Jamal looked me dead in the eye. It is a feature designed for people with hearing aids. It turns your iPhone into a remote microphone. If you leave your phone on the table and walk away with your earbuds in, you can hear what people are saying in the room. He paused, letting that sink in. But that is not how they set it up. They paired these earbuds to your phone, but they also linked it to their iCloud account as a family device. Booker, do you understand what I am telling you? If you have these in your ears and your phone is in your pocket, it acts like a wire. But it works both ways. It amplifies the ambient noise. He tapped the screen again. If they have the receiving app open on their end, they can hear everything happening around your phone. Everything. The silence in the break room suddenly felt heavy. Oppressive. I looked at the phone. It wasn't a gift. It was a bug. It was a wiretap. My mind flashed back to last night. Brad asking about the house. Chloe asking about my health. They weren't making conversation. They were establishing a baseline. And the battery drain. The heat. It was hot because it was transmitting audio, I whispered. Jamal nodded. High-quality audio eats battery life. That is why your phone was dying. They were listening to us right now until you put them in the case. I felt a surge of rage so pure and hot it almost blinded me. I stood up my chair, scraping violently against the floor. My hands were shaking, not from age, from fury. I reached for the white case. I am going to smash this into dust, I growled. I am going to drive over there and shove these plastic pieces down Brad's throat. I grabbed the case. I was ready to throw it against the concrete wall. Booker, stop. Jamal's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. Don't do it. Let go of me, Jamal. They are treating me like a prisoner, like a child. Think, Booker, think. Jamal stared at me, intense and urgent. You taught me logistics, right? You taught me that information is the most valuable asset in the supply chain. If you smash that device right now, what happens? The signal goes dead. They will know you found out. They will know the game is over. I stopped. My chest was heaving. So what? Let them know. No, Jamal said, releasing my wrist slowly. If they know you are on to them, they will change tactics. They will come at you with something else. Lawyers, doctors. They will claim you are paranoid. They will say you are destroying property in a fit of dementia rage. They will use your anger against you. I sat back down slowly. The rage was still there, but it was cooling, hardening into something like steel. Jamal was right. Brad was a snake, but he was a desperate snake. And Chloe was manipulative. If I confronted them now, they would gaslight me. They would say I hit the wrong button. They would say I was confused. So what do? I asked. Do I just let them listen to my life? Jamal smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was a shark smile. No. We let them listen to the life we want them to hear. He pulled the phone closer to him. We don't disconnect it. We feed the beast. They want to track you. Fine. Let's send them on a wild goose chase. They want to hear your conversations. Fine. Let's give them a script. He looked at me. Booker, you have a spare tablet at home, right? One not connected to this phone. Yes, I said. An old iPad. Good. Tonight, you are going to go home. You are going to put these earbuds in. And you are going to put on a performance. You are going to use their own weapon to dig their grave. I looked at the innocent white box on the table. 5 minutes ago, it was a betrayal. Now it was an opportunity. I picked up the case. Jamal, I said, can you hack their email? If they are this sloppy with the iCloud account, they probably reused passwords. Jamal cracked his knuckles. Does a forklift lift heavy things? He opened a terminal window on his laptop. Black screen, green text. Give me 10 minutes, Booker. Let's see why they are so desperate to know your business. I sat back and watched him work. Outside the warehouse doors, the trucks were rumbling. Inside, the trap was being set. They wanted a senile old man. They were about to get a veteran supervisor who knew exactly how to handle damaged goods. The hunt was on. The house felt different when I walked back inside. It wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It was a stage. Every room had invisible eyes, and the phone in my pocket was a microphone broadcasting to an audience that wanted to see me fail. I sat down in my recliner, the leather groaning under my weight. I kept the earbuds in. They were uncomfortable foreign objects invading my personal space, but they were necessary. I pulled my phone out and placed it on the side table next to a half-empty cup of tea. I took a deep breath. It was showtime. I dialed a number. It wasn't a real number. It was the automated line for the electric company, but I knew they wouldn't pick up for at least 5 minutes of hold music. To Brad and Chloe listening on the other end, it would just look like an outgoing call. Hello, I said, my voice trembling just a little. Is this Dr. Evans' office? I paused, leaving space for an imaginary receptionist to answer. Yes, this is Booker Coleman. I was calling because, well, I seem to be having some trouble again. I leaned back, closing my eyes. I imagined Brad sitting in his car or maybe at his kitchen table, grinning as he pressed the headphones tighter to his ears. I lost my checkbook again. I continued pitching my voice up to sound frail and confused. I had it this morning, I swear. But now I can't find it. And yesterday I forgot where I parked the truck. I walked around the grocery store lot for an hour. I am scared, doctor. It is getting worse, like a fog in my head. I let out a long, shaky sigh. Okay, I will try to write things down. Thank you. I hung up the phone. My hand was steady, but my heart was pounding. It wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. It was the rush I used to get when a crane load snapped a cable and I had to clear the floor in 10 seconds. I sat there for another 10 minutes muttering to myself, things like, where is my glasses and did I feed the cat? I don't even have a cat. Then I stood up, I left the phone on the table. I'm going to take a nap, I said out loud to the empty room. I walked heavily toward the stairs, dragging my feet so the sound would carry. I went up to the bedroom, dropped my shoes on the floor with a loud thud and closed the door, but I didn't sleep. I went to the back of my closet to the old shoebox where I kept the things I didn't use anymore. Buried under a stack of old Polaroids was a Samsung tablet. It was 5 years old, cracked in the corner and covered in dust. But most importantly, it was completely disconnected from my Apple ecosystem. I took it into the bathroom, the only room in the house that didn't share a wall with the neighbors. I sat on the edge of the tub and powered it up. The screen flickered to life, casting a blue glow on the tiles. Jamal had given me a piece of paper before I left the warehouse. On it was a web address and a string of characters. He called it a back door. He said Brad used the same password for his email that he used for the iCloud account. The man was lazy. Criminals usually are. I typed in the credentials. My fingers felt thick and clumsy on the glass screen, but I took my time. Access granted. The inbox flooded the screen. I started scrolling. At first it was just junk. Promotions for luxury watches, spam from travel agencies. But then I saw the emails from a sender named Apex Collections. I opened the first one dated 2 weeks ago. Mr. Patterson, this is your final notice. The outstanding balance of $50,000 is past due. Interest is accruing daily. 50,000. I felt a cold chill. Brad wasn't just broke. He was underwater. I opened the next one. This one was from an online gambling platform called Vegas Kings. Deposit confirmed $10,000. That was 3 days ago. I kept digging. The numbers kept getting bigger. Total debt across 3 different credit cards and 2 loan sharks was pushing $200,000. Then I found the email that made my blood freeze. It was sent yesterday morning. The subject line was simply, "The House." It was addressed to a man named Stephen Vance, a real estate investor known in Chicago for buying distressed properties for cash and turning them into cheap rentals. Stephen, we are ready to move forward. The old man is fading fast. We gave him the tracking device yesterday and we are already compiling the audio evidence of his dementia. He is forgetting things. He is getting lost. We expect to have the conservatorship filed within 30 days. Once the court grants me power of attorney as his legal guardian, we can bypass the probate process. I can sign the deed over to you immediately. The house is yours for $400,000 cash. Just have the money ready. Brad. I put the tablet down on the toilet seat. I felt sick, physically sick. Conservatorship. I knew that word. We had a guy at the union whose kids did that to him. It is a legal tool designed to protect people who can't take care of themselves. But in the wrong hands, it is a weapon. It strips you of your rights. You can't spend your own money. You can't hire a lawyer. You can't even choose where you live. You become a child in the eyes of the law. They didn't just want the house. They wanted to erase me. They needed me to be incompetent. That is why Chloe was gaslighting me. That is why things went missing. That is why they gave me the earbuds. They weren't just listening for my safety. They were listening for mistakes. And if I didn't make enough mistakes, they would manufacture them. I looked at the email again, fading fast. I looked at my hands. They were scarred from 50 years of labor. They were strong hands. Hands that had built a life. Hands that had held my wife while she took her last breath. And these vultures thought they could just file a piece of paper and turn me into a vegetable. I picked up the tablet again. I needed more. I went to the sent folder. I found an email from Chloe to Brad. I moved his blood pressure medication to the bathroom cabinet and put the sugar pills in the bottle on the nightstand. If he misses a few doses, he will get dizzy and confused. It will look great for the doctor's evaluation next week. My hand involuntarily crushed the edge of the tablet. The screen cracked a little more. Those spells I had last week. The dizziness, the fog. I thought it was age. I thought my body was finally giving up on me. I had even cried about it, thinking I was losing my mind. It wasn't age, it was poison, or rather the lack of medicine. My own stepdaughter. The girl I taught to ride a bike. The girl I walked down the aisle because her own father was too drunk to show up. She was poisoning me with sugar pills so she could buy a condo in the Loop. I turned off the tablet. I couldn't look at it anymore. I had seen the face of the devil, and it wore my son-in-law's cheap suit. I hid the tablet back in the shoebox deep under the photos. I stood up and looked in the bathroom mirror. The face staring back at me looked tired. The eyes were red. The lines were deep. But the fear was gone. They wanted a senile old man. They wanted a helpless victim who couldn't find his own checkbook. Fine. I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I would be the most confused, helpless, pathetic old man they had ever seen. I would lead them right to the edge of the cliff. I would let them think they had won. I would let them sign the papers. I would let them spend the money they didn't have yet. And then I would push. I walked back into the bedroom. I made sure to shuffle my feet. I picked up the phone from the nightstand. I dialed the time and temperature number. "Hello," I said into the silence. "Sarah, is that you? I made the brisket you like. Why aren't you coming home?" I started to cry. Fake sobbing at first, but then real tears came. Tears for Sarah. Tears for the family we thought we built. Tears for the little girl Chloe used to be before the world turned her into this monster. I cried into the phone knowing Brad was listening, knowing he was probably high-fiving his friends right now thinking he had hit the jackpot. Let them laugh. Tomorrow the game would change. Tomorrow I wouldn't just be the prey. Tomorrow I would start laying the landmines. I laid down on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. The earbuds were still in my ears, humming with a low static. Connected, the voice whispered again. "You have no idea," I thought. "You have absolutely no idea." The war for my mind began on a Tuesday morning. It didn't start with shouting or lawyers. It started with my car keys. I am a creature of habit. You don't work 40 years in logistics without developing a system for everything. Or my keys go in the ceramic bowl by the front door. My wallet goes in the top drawer of the nightstand. My glasses go on the kitchen counter next to the coffee maker. That is the system. It has been the system since 1985. But on Tuesday morning, the bowl was empty. I stood there staring at the little hand-painted dish Sarah had bought in Mexico. I felt a flicker of panic. Just a small one, the kind you feel when you pat your pocket and don't feel your phone. I checked my pockets. Nothing. I checked the kitchen counter. Nothing. I spent 20 minutes tearing the living room apart. I checked under the sofa cushions. I checked the pockets of the jacket I wore yesterday. I even checked the bathroom. Then I opened the refrigerator to get some milk for my coffee. There they were, sitting right next to the carton of eggs. My car keys, frozen cold to the touch. I stared at them. The metal was frosted over. I didn't put them there. I know I didn't put them there. A man doesn't mistake a refrigerator for a ceramic bowl. But standing there in the cold light of the kitchen, a tiny voice in the back of my head whispered, "Did you? That is how it works. That is the poison they inject into you. It is called gaslighting, but that word is too soft. It is psychological dismantling. They make you doubt the ground you walk on until you are crawling on your hands and knees begging for someone to tell you what is real." I took the keys out. I didn't tell anyone. I just put them in my pocket. 2 days later, it was the remote control. I found it in the linen closet wrapped inside a towel. The day after that, my favorite jazz record was missing from its sleeve. I found it in the dishwasher. Thankfully, I hadn't turned the machine on. I knew they had keys. I knew they were coming in when I was at the park or at the store. They were moving my life around inches at a time, trying to make me believe I was losing my grip. Then came the performance. Chloe came over on Friday. She let herself in using the key she thought I didn't know she had. I was sitting in the living room reading the paper. The earbuds were in my ears, playing nothing but white noise while transmitting the sound of the room to her phone. "Dad," she said, her voice dripping with that fake syrup sweetness. I found the milk in the pantry again. and the cereal was in the fridge. She walked into the room holding a gallon of milk. It was warm. I looked at her. She was wearing a yellow sundress, looking like an angel while she tried to bury her father alive. I must have been distracted, I said, keeping my voice flat. Distracted, she sighed, sitting down opposite me. Dad, we need to talk. Brad and I are really worried. You are doing this more and more. Last week it was the keys. Today it is the milk. This is how it starts. What starts? I asked. Dementia. She whispered the word like it was a secret. Sundowning. It is dangerous, Dad. What if you leave the stove on? What if you forget how to drive while you are on the highway? We can't watch you 24/7. You need professional care. I looked at her hands. They were resting on her knees, calm and steady. She was lying to my face, dismantling my reality, and she didn't even blink. I will try to be more careful, I said, looking down at my shoes. I played the part, the defeated old man. Good, she said, patting my hand. We just want what is best for you. When she left, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I went to my workshop in the garage. I grabbed the bag Jamal had given me. If they wanted to turn my house into a stage, I was going to turn it into a television studio. Jamal had sourced 4 micro cameras for me. They were no bigger than a button, no blinking lights, no Wi-Fi signal that Brad could detect with his phone. These were hardwired recording to a secure SD card hidden in the baseboards. I spent the next 6 hours installing them. One in the kitchen, hidden inside the smoke detector. One in the living room, tucked between the books on the top shelf. One in the hallway. And one in the bathroom directly facing the medicine cabinet. I knew Brad was the one doing the heavy lifting. Chloe was the face, but Brad was the muscle. He was the one desperate for money. He was the one who looked at me not like a father, but like an obstacle. I waited. I kept up my routine. I went to the park. I complained on the phone to my imaginary doctor about losing things. I let them think the walls were closing in on me. 3 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, I went to the grocery store. I made sure to announce it. I am going to get some bread, I said out loud to the empty house, knowing the earbuds were listening. I will be back in an hour. I drove around the block and parked 3 streets over. I sat in my truck and waited. 10 minutes later, Brad's BMW pulled into my driveway. He didn't knock. He unlocked the door and walked in like he owned the place. I couldn't see him live because the cameras weren't connected to the internet, but I knew he was there. I waited a full hour, giving him enough time to do whatever dirty work he had planned. When I saw his car leave, I drove back. I walked into the house. It smelled of his cologne, cheap musk and ambition. I went straight to the garage and pulled the SD cards. I loaded them onto the offline tablet. I watched the footage. There was Brad in the kitchen. He opened the fridge and moved the eggs to the freezer. He took my mail from the counter and hid it in the trash can. Petty things, cruel things. But then I switched to the bathroom camera. My breath caught in my throat. Brad walked into the bathroom. He wasn't moving things around this time. He opened the medicine cabinet. He reached for the orange prescription bottle on the middle shelf. Lisinopril, my blood pressure medication. I have had hypertension for 10 years. Without those pills, my pressure spikes. If it spikes too high, I stroke out. It is that simple. On the screen, I saw Brad take the bottle down. He opened it and dumped the pills into a plastic bag he brought with him. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out another bag. He poured white pills into my bottle. They looked exactly the same. Round, white, small. He shook the bottle, capped it, and put it back exactly where he found it. Then he looked in the mirror. He smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile. It was a satisfied smile. He checked his teeth, adjusted his hair, and walked out. I sat there in the garage, staring at the frozen image of my son-in-law. This wasn't about the house anymore. This wasn't about the money. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were speeding up the process. I walked upstairs to the bathroom. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through water. I opened the cabinet and took down the bottle. It looked innocent. It looked like salvation. I poured one pill into my hand. I touched it to the tip of my tongue. Sweet. Sugar. He had replaced my life-saving medication with sugar pills. If I took these for a week, my blood pressure would skyrocket. I would get dizzy. I would get confused. I might even faint. And if I fainted and went to the hospital, the doctors would see my pressure was through the roof. They would ask if I took my meds. I would say yes. They would look at my blood work and see no medication in my system. Conclusion. The patient is forgetting to take his pills. The patient is unreliable. The patient needs a conservator, or worse. I would have a massive stroke and die right here on the kitchen floor. Brad hadn't just moved my keys, he had loaded a gun and pointed it at my head. I put the pill back in the bottle. I didn't flush them. I didn't throw them away. I put the bottle in a tamper evidence bag I had from my warehouse days. I sealed it. I dated it. Then I reached into my secret stash in the shoebox where I kept my real emergency supply of medication, the one I kept for travel. I took a real pill. I swallowed it dry. I looked at the sealed bag in my hand. This was it. This was the nail in their coffin. Burglary is one thing, fraud is another, but tampering with medication, that is attempted murder. I went back downstairs, I put the earbuds in, I dialed the time and temperature number again. "Hello, doctor," I said, my voice trembling with a performance that was no longer entirely fake. "I don't feel so good today. My head is pounding, I feel dizzy. I took my pill, but I don't know, maybe I need to lie down." I paused, imagining Brad listening on the other end. I imagined him checking his watch, counting the minutes until I collapsed. "I am just going to sleep for a while," I whispered. "I am so tired." I hung up. "Sleep well, Brad," I thought, "because the nightmare is coming for you, and you won't be able to wake up from it." I hid the evidence bag in the air vent. Tomorrow I would see the lawyer, but tonight I was going to let them think they had won. I was going to let them think the sugar was working. I sat in the dark house, the red light of the smoke detector blinking above me, the only witness to a crime that would tear my family apart and set me free. The next morning, I drove to a part of town that hadn't changed since the 80s. The pavement was cracked and the brick buildings were covered in soot, but this was where the real work got done. I parked my truck right on the edge of Washington Park. I checked the app on the tablet Jamal gave me. The GPS dot showed me sitting on a park bench near the duck pond. Technically, I was parked 50 feet away from the pond, but to a satellite looking down from space, it looked exactly like I was feeding the birds. I sat in the cab of the truck and prepared my cover. Jamal had given me a small MP3 player the size of a matchbox. It had one track on it. An hour-long loop of wind rustling through trees, distant traffic, and the occasional duck quacking. I slipped it into my breast pocket, right next to my phone. I turned the volume just loud enough for the phone's microphone to pick it up, but not loud enough for anyone standing near me to hear. To Brad and Chloe listening in on their high-tech setup, it would sound exactly like I was taking my morning walk. I put the earbuds in, connected, the voice whispered. I stepped out of the truck and walked briskly across the street, not into the park, but into a narrow building with a brass plaque that hadn't been polished since the Reagan administration. Steinberg and Associates. Solomon Steinberg is 80 years old. He is a short man with thick glasses and a mind like a bear trap. We met 30 years ago during the union strikes. He was the only lawyer who would take our case against the shipping magnates when they tried to cut our pensions. He didn't just win, he made them apologize. I walked up the creaky stairs to the second floor. The office smelled of old paper mahogany and stale cigar smoke. It was a fortress of solitude. Solomon was waiting for me. He didn't hug me. Men like us don't hug. He just nodded and pointed to the leather chair opposite his desk. "You look like hell, Booker," he grunted. "I feel like hell, Saul," I replied, keeping my voice low so it wouldn't overpower the bird sounds playing in my pocket. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the evidence. The tamper-proof bag with the sugar pills, the tablet with the downloaded emails, and the printouts of Brad's gambling debts. Solomon put on his reading glasses. He didn't say a word for 20 minutes. The only sound in the room was the turning of pages and the soft, artificial quacking from my pocket. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were cold, not at me, but for me. "They are trying to kill you, Booker," he said flatly. "This isn't just fraud. This is a slow execution." "I know," I said. "That is why I am here. They want a conservatorship. They want to declare me incompetent." Solomon leaned back his leather chair, groaning. "They have a strong case if they control the narrative. If they have a doctor on their payroll and audio of you sounding confused, a judge might sign that order before you even know there is a hearing. In Illinois, the law is designed to protect the elderly, but it assumes the family has good intentions. When the family is the predator, the law becomes the weapon." He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. "We need to nuke the site, Booker. We don't just defend, we attack." He picked up his fountain pen. "First, we draft a revocation of power of attorney. I don't care what you signed when you were sick. This document supersedes it. It states clearly that you are of sound mind and you are revoking any and all permissions previously granted to Chloe Coleman or Brad Patterson." he scribbled furiously. Second, we create a revocable living trust. We move the house, your savings, and your pension into the trust. You are the trustee. I am the successor trustee. If something happens to you, control does not go to your next of kin. It goes to me, and I will burn that house to the ground before I let them touch a doorknob. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my chest. Do it, Saul. And third, he said, looking at me over his glasses, we need to trap them. They are building a case that you are senile. We need to build a case that they are conspirators. You need to let them think they are winning right up until the moment the handcuffs click. Suddenly, my pocket vibrated. I looked at the phone screen. It was Brad. I looked at Solomon. He signaled for me to answer. I took a deep breath. I checked the volume on the MP3 player in my pocket, ensuring the background noise of the park was audible. I answered the phone, letting my hand tremble just enough to make the connection crackle. "Hello?" I said, sounding breathless. "Booker, is that you?" Brad's voice came through the earbuds, sharp and impatient. "Where are you? We have been watching the tracker. You have been at the park for 2 hours. You never stay that long." I stood up and started marching in place on the Persian rug in Solomon's office to simulate the sound of footsteps and heavy breathing. I don't know, Brad," I stammered. "I came to feed the ducks, but then I started walking, and now nothing looks familiar. The trees all look the same." I heard Brad muffle the phone, likely turning to Chloe. "He is lost. He is wandering." He came back on the line, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Okay, Booker, stay calm. Look around. Do you see a street sign? Do you see the fountain? I see a bench." I lied. "I am just so tired, Brad. My legs hurt. I think I missed my blood pressure medicine this morning. My head is spinning." Solomon watched me, his eyes twinkling with dark amusement. He gave me a thumbs up. "I am sitting down," I said, collapsing back into the leather chair, letting out a long groan. "I just need to rest my eyes for a minute. No, Booker. Do not sleep," Brad commanded. "Listen to me. Stay right where you are. Do not move. I am coming to get you." "Okay, I am getting in the car right now." No, don't trouble yourself," I whimpered. "I can find my way back. I just need to think." "Stay put," Brad yelled. "We are doing this for your own good. Just sit there and wait for me." The line went dead. I took the earbuds out and placed them on the desk. "He is coming," I said to Solomon. "He thinks I am lost in the park." Solomon smiled, a shark-like grin. "Excellent. He is driving over there to save you. When he finds you, he will record it. He will use it as proof that you can't be left unsupervised." "But I won't be there," I said. "Exactly," Solomon replied. "You are going to leave now. You are going to drive your truck to the other side of the park near the exit. When he calls you back in a panic because he can't find you at the pond, you tell him you remembered where the truck was. You tell him you are already driving home." I understood. It would make him furious. It would make him question the technology. But more importantly, it would make him desperate. A desperate man makes mistakes. I stood up to leave. "One more thing," Booker Solomon said, handing me the fresh documents. "Sign these. I will have them notarized by my secretary immediately. As of this moment, you are legally untouchable. But don't tell them yet. Let them file their papers. Let them commit perjury in a court of law. That is when we nail them." I signed the papers. My signature was firm, strong. It was the signature of a man taking back his life. I walked out of the office and back to my truck. I turned off the MP3 player. I drove to the north exit of the park and waited. 10 minutes later, I saw the BMW screech to a halt near the duck pond. Brad jumped out looking frantic, holding his phone up like a compass. He was filming. He was running around the benches looking for the senile old man who was supposed to be slumped over in a diabetic coma. I watched him run in circles. He looked ridiculous. A man chasing a ghost. My phone rang again. I answered. "Where the hell are you?" Booker Brad screamed, abandoning all pretense of kindness. "I am at the pond. You aren't here." "Oh, Brad," I said, my voice suddenly calm and cheerful. I remembered where I parked. "I am almost home. Why are you at the pond? I thought you were at work." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing hard. I could hear the gears grinding in his head. He had the recording of me saying I was lost, but now he had a reality that contradicted it. If he showed the recording to a judge, I could just say I was confused for a moment but recovered. It wasn't enough for a conservatorship. Not yet. He needed something bigger. He needed a catastrophe. "I am glad you are safe, Booker," he said through gritted teeth. "Go home. Stay there. We need to talk tonight." He hung up. I put the truck in gear. The first battle was won, but the war was just heating up. They would come for me tonight. They would try to force the issue. Let them come. I had a lawyer, I had a camera crew in my baseboards, and I had a fresh bottle of real medication in my pocket. I drove home humming a jazz tune. For the first time in months, the city looked beautiful. The sun was shining on the Chicago skyline, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt dangerous. The drive to the clinic was silent, but the air inside the BMW was screaming. Brad gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He drove aggressively, weaving through the mid-morning traffic on Michigan Avenue, cutting off taxis and ignoring pedestrians. He was a man on a deadline. A man who had already spent the money he didn't have and now needed the paperwork to match his bank account. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. I had my phone in my shirt pocket, camera lens facing out just enough to catch the audio clearly. I had set it to record before we left the house. "Where are we going, Brad?" I asked, keeping my voice soft and unsure. "This isn't where Dr. Evans works." "Dr. Evans is busy," Booker Brad snapped without looking at me. "This is a specialist. Dr. Thorne. He is the best in the city for memory issues. He is going to help you. Help me." That was a rich word coming from a man who had replaced my heart medication with sugar. We pulled up to a modern building in the Loop. Glass and steel. No soul. The kind of place that charges you $50 just to validate your parking. We went up to the 14th floor. The waiting room was plush with beige carpets and abstract art that looked like someone had spilled coffee on a canvas. I sat down and picked up a magazine. I held it upside down for a few seconds just to see Brad's reaction. He sighed loud and dramatic. He reached over and flipped the magazine right side up. "Jesus, Booker," he whispered, hissing through his teeth. "Try to focus." I looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Oh, thank you, son." The words were just swimming a bit. A nurse called my name. She didn't smile. She looked tired. We followed her down a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and money. Dr. Thorne was waiting for us. He was a tall man with a fake tan and a suit that cost more than my first car. He shook Brad's hand with the familiarity of a co-conspirator. "Good to see you again," Brad, Thorne said. Again. So they had met before, probably over a steak dinner paid for with my credit card to discuss how to put the old horse out to pasture. "And this must be Booker," the doctor said, turning to me. He didn't offer his hand. He just gestured to the exam table. "Hop up there for me." I climbed up, moving slowly, letting my joints pop. I saw Brad take a seat in the corner, pulling out his notebook like a diligent student. So, Booker Dr. Thorne began flipping through a file that looked suspiciously thin. "Brad tells me you have been having some trouble lately, getting lost, forgetting names, mood swings." I looked at my hands. I don't know, sir. Sometimes the fog comes in." "Right," Thorne said, making a note. "And the medication. Are you taking it?" "I try," I said. "But sometimes the bottles look different." Thorne exchanged a look with Brad. A look that said, "This is going to be easier than we thought." "Okay, let's do a simple cognitive assessment," Thorne said. "Just standard procedure. I am going to ask you some questions. Don't worry if you don't know the answers. Just do your best." He held up 3 fingers. "I want you to remember 3 words for me, Booker. Apple, penny, table. Can you repeat them?" "Apple, penny, table," I said slowly. "Good. Keep those in your head. Now tell me, what year is it?" I hesitated. I scrunched up my face. "It is 2020. Brad leaned forward in his chair. "Take your time," Booker Thorne said, but his tone was bored. 2024, I said finally. Thorne looked disappointed. He wanted me to say 1990. "Okay. Who is the President of the United States?" I answered correctly. Thorne frowned. He flipped the page. "Let's try something else. I want you to count backward from 100 by 7s. Can you do that?" This is a classic test. It requires concentration and working memory. For a man with dementia, it is a mountain. For a man who spent 40 years calculating shipping weights and inventory codes in his head, it was a warm-up. But I paused. I looked at the ceiling. 93, I whispered. "Go on," Thorne urged, tapping his pen. 86. Good. Next. 79. I stopped. I looked confused. 71, I said, intentionally getting it wrong. Brad let out a breath he had been holding. Thorne scribbled furiously on his pad. Okay, that is fine, Booker. Now remember those 3 words I told you earlier. What were they? I looked blankly at him. Words. Did you say words? Apple penny table, Brad blurted out from the corner. Thorne shot him a look. Mr. Patterson, please. Let the patient answer. I don't remember any words, I said, looking down. I am sorry. Thorne closed the file. He looked at Brad with a sympathetic nod. Well, based on what I am seeing here, combined with the family's testimony regarding the wandering and the confusion, I think we are looking at early-stage Alzheimer's, possibly vascular dementia. I can write the referral for the competency hearing and the assisted living facility. Brad stood up, trying to hide his excitement. Thank you, doctor. We just want him safe. Hold on, I said. My voice changed. The tremor was gone. The hesitation was gone. The old man who looked at his shoes was gone. I sat up straight on the exam table, my spine aligned. I looked Dr. Thorne directly in the eyes. I didn't finish the test, I said. Thorne looked confused. Excuse me, I said I didn't finish. You asked for 3 words. Apple, penny, table. You asked for the year, 2024. You asked for the countdown, 93, 86, 79, 72, 65, 58, 51, 44, 37, 30, 23, 16, 9, 2, and -5 if you want to keep going into the integers. The room went dead silent. The hum of the air conditioner seemed to get louder. Brad's mouth fell open. Thorne looked like I had just slapped him. Well, that is, Thorne stammered. And while we are testing memory, doctor, let's talk about yours. I continued, my voice sharp and commanding, the voice of a supervisor who just caught an employee stealing. You seem to have forgotten to check my blood pressure, which is odd considering my chart says I have hypertension. You also forgot to check my pupils or my reflexes. In fact, you haven't laid a hand on me. Booker, what are you doing? Brad said, his voice rising in panic. I am having a cognitive assessment, Brad, I said, not looking at him. I turned back to the doctor. I also noticed something interesting about your diploma on the wall, doctor. I pointed to the framed degree hanging behind his desk. University of Illinois College of Medicine, class of 1998. Very impressive. But I couldn't help but notice the certification number from the medical board in the bottom left corner. IL-455029. I paused, letting the numbers hang in the air. That is a very high number for 1998. My friend's son graduated in 2005, and his number was lower. It almost looks like a reprint, or maybe a reinstatement after a suspension. Thorne turned pale. His fake tan suddenly looked like orange paint on a white wall. I checked the public records before I came here. Doctor, I lied. I didn't check anything, but I knew men like him. They always have a skeleton in the closet. I just rattled the door handle. I suggest you reevaluate your diagnosis, doctor, I said, sliding off the table. Because if this goes to a court hearing, and I am asked to testify about this examination, I will recount every single detail, including the fact that you diagnosed me without a physical exam while my son-in-law sat in the corner coaching the results. Thorne stood up. He was sweating now. Mr. Patterson, I think there has been a misunderstanding. Brad stepped forward, his face red with rage. Doctor, don't listen to him. This is part of the disease. He gets paranoid. He gets aggressive. This is exactly what I was talking about. Thorne looked at Brad, then at me. He looked at the calm steel in my eyes. He looked at the phone in my pocket, which I tapped lightly with my finger. He made a calculation. He realized that Brad's money wasn't worth his medical license. He sat back down and opened the file again. He crossed out the previous notes with heavy, aggressive strokes. The patient is oriented to time, place, and person. Thorne said, his voice tight. Memory recall is excellent. Calculation skills are intact. There is no evidence of cognitive decline at this time. What? Brad shouted. Are you kidding me? He forgot the words 5 minutes ago. He was testing you, Mr. Patterson, Thorne said, looking at Brad with disdain. And you failed. Thorne ripped the page out of the file and handed it to me. You are perfectly healthy, Mr. Coleman. Please leave my office. And don't come back. I took the paper. I folded it neatly and put it in my pocket next to the recording phone. Thank you, doctor, I said. You have a nice day. I walked out. Brad followed me into the hallway. He didn't say a word until we were in the elevator. The doors closed, trapping us in a metal box. What the hell was that? He hissed. What was what, Brad? I asked, looking at the numbers counting down. You played me. You played him. You acted like you were crazy, and then—" I turned to him. I looked him up and down, taking in the cheap suit, the sweat on his forehead, the desperation in his eyes. "I just had a moment of clarity, Brad. The doctor said I am fine. Isn't that good news? I thought you wanted me to be healthy." He stared at me. He wanted to scream. He wanted to hit me. But he couldn't. Because if he admitted he was angry that I was healthy, he admitted the game. "Yeah," he choked out. "Yeah. Great news, Booker." The elevator dinged at the lobby. I walked out first. My step was light. I had the paper. I had the recording. And I had the look on his face. But the best part was knowing that this was just the jab. The knockout punch was still coming. I touched the earbuds in my pocket. "Let's go home, Brad," I called back to him. "I think I know where I am now." I knew exactly where I was. I was in the driver's seat, and for the first time in months, I liked the view. The sun had gone down hours ago, leaving my house wrapped in a heavy silence that felt more like a waiting room than a home. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea in front of me. I wasn't drinking it. It was just a prop. Everything in my life had become a prop in a play I was directing, but the audience didn't know the curtain had already risen. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the white plastic case. I opened it slowly, making sure the click of the lid was audible. I took out the earbuds and placed them in my ears. "Connected," the voice whispered. I took a deep breath. I knew Brad was listening. I knew he had his phone glued to his ear, probably sitting in his car or hunched over a bar counter, wondering how he was going to pay the $200,000 he owed to men who broke kneecaps for a living. Desperation makes a man hear what he wants to hear. And tonight, I was going to tell him exactly what he was dying to hear. I tapped the table rhythmically with my fingernails, creating a nervous, fidgeting sound. Then I started to talk. I didn't speak to the air. I spoke to Sarah. My wife had been gone for 3 years, but tonight she was going to help me catch a rat. "Oh, Sarah," I whispered, my voice cracking just enough to sound pathetic. "I don't know what to do. The kids, they want to put me away. They think I'm losing my mind." I paused, taking a shaky sip of tea. "Maybe I am losing it, Sarah. Maybe they are right. I can't remember where I put the keys. I can't remember the doctor's name. But I remember one thing. I remember the promise." I leaned closer to the phone on the table, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial murmur. "I promised you I would keep the emergency fund safe. $150,000. It is still there, Sarah. Right where we put it, in the old rusted safe in the basement, behind the furnace." I let out a long sigh. Thank God I never told Chloe about the combination. She would spend it on clothes and vacations. Brad would gamble it away in a week. No, that money is safe. It is wrapped in plastic inside the false bottom. $150,000 in cash. I stood up and shuffled my feet on the linoleum floor. "I should go check on it," I muttered. "Just to be sure. The combination. Right. 24. 10. 19. Your birthday, Sarah." I walked toward the basement door, opening it with a loud creak. I thumped down 2 steps, then stopped. "No," I said out loud. "My knees hurt too much today. It is safe. Nobody knows it is down there. Just you and me, Sarah. Just you and me." I walked back to the table, took the earbuds out, and placed them back in the case. The connection was cut. The bait was in the water. Now I had to see if the shark was hungry. I went upstairs to my bedroom and locked the door. I pulled the tablet out from under the mattress and opened the tracking app. The blue dot representing Brad had been stationary for the last 2 hours at a location on the west side called the Velvet Lounge. It was a dive bar known for backroom poker games. I watched the screen, holding my breath. For a minute, nothing happened. The dot stayed still. Then it moved. It didn't just drift. It shot out of the parking lot. It hit the main road. The speed indicator jumped from 0 to 40, then to 60. He was moving fast. He was moving recklessly. He was heading south, toward my house. I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. Greed is a powerful drug. It overrides caution. It overrides logic. Brad heard $150,000 and his brain shut down. He didn't ask himself why a retired warehouse manager would keep that much cash in a basement. He didn't ask himself why I would say the combination out loud. He only saw his debts vanishing. I checked the time. It was 11:30 at night. He would be here in 20 minutes. I had time to prepare the stage. I went down to the basement. It was a dark, musty place filled with boxes of Christmas decorations and old tools. In the corner behind the furnace stood the safe. It wasn't a family heirloom. I had bought it 3 days ago from a pawn shop for $50. It was heavy and looked impressive, but the locking mechanism was simple. I had set the combination to exactly what I said on the tape. 24, 10, 19. I opened the heavy iron door. Inside, I placed the treasure. I didn't have $150,000. What I had was a stack of paper I had ordered from a theatrical supply website, Motion Picture Money. From a distance, it looked like stacks of $100 bills. Up close, it said, "For motion picture, use only," in small print. But Brad wouldn't be reading the fine print in the dark. He would see the green bands. He would see Benjamin Franklin's face. And he would see his salvation. But the money was just the cheese in the mousetrap. The real gift was sitting right on top of the stack. I am a tinkerer. I spent 40 years fixing hydraulic lifts and pneumatic tubes. I know how pressure works. I had rigged a small canister of blue dye. It wasn't dangerous. It wasn't an explosive. It was a pressurized paint cartridge rigged to a spring-loaded pin. It was the same technology banks use to mark robbers, but I had modified it to be a little more enthusiastic. I attached the trigger wire to the inside of the safe door. When the door swung open past 90 degrees, the pin would pull. The canister would depress, and anyone standing in front of it would be painted blue for the next week. I checked the mechanism one last time. It was crude, but effective. I closed the safe door and spun the dial. I went back upstairs. I turned off all the lights in the house except for the faint glow of the microwave clock in the kitchen. I sat in my armchair in the living room facing the window. The street was quiet. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't the victim hiding under the bed. I was the hunter in the blind. 12 minutes later, I saw headlights sweep across the living room wall. A car engine cut off abruptly outside. No car door slam. He was trying to be quiet. I watched through the sheer curtains. A shadow moved up the driveway. It wasn't Chloe. Chloe wouldn't dirty her hands with a break-in. This was all Brad. He didn't come to the front door. He went around the side to the basement bulkhead. Smart, I thought. He thinks he is bypassing the house alarm. What he didn't know was that I had disabled the silent alarm on the basement door an hour ago. I wanted him to get inside. I wanted him to feel the cold steel of the safe under his fingers. I heard the rusty hinges of the bulkhead door groan. He was in. I picked up my phone. I didn't call the police yet. Not yet. I opened the app that connected to the camera I had hidden in the basement rafters. It was a night vision camera. The image on my screen was grainy and green, but clear enough. I saw Brad descending the wooden stairs. He was wearing black clothes and gloves. He had a flashlight in his mouth. He looked frantic. He swept the beam of light around the room until it landed on the safe behind the furnace. I saw his shoulders drop in relief. He probably thought he was the luckiest man in Chicago. He rushed over to the safe. He dropped to his knees. It looked like he was praying at an altar of iron. He grabbed the dial. I could see his lips moving. 24, 10, 19. He spun the dial. Left, right, left. He grabbed the handle. I held my breath in the living room. He pulled. The handle turned. The heavy door swung open. Brad reached in, his eyes wide, his hands trembling with greed, reaching for the stacks of cash. Then it happened. Pop! It was a soft sound, barely audible from upstairs. But on the screen, I saw the result instantly. A cloud of blue mist exploded from the safe. It hit Brad square in the face. It covered his chest. It coated his hands. He fell backwards, scrambling on the concrete floor, coughing and wiping at his eyes. He looked at his hands. They were bright blue. He looked at the money. It was covered in blue dye. He stood up, cursing silently, kicking the safe. He grabbed a stack of the money, trying to wipe it off, trying to salvage something. That is when he must have seen the words, "Motion picture use only." He froze. He looked up at the ceiling. He didn't know where the camera was, but he knew he was being watched. He knew the game was rigged. He threw the fake money on the floor. He turned and ran up the stairs, stumbling in the dark, leaving blue handprints on the railing. I sat in the dark living room and smiled. He was marked, literally. I watched him run to his car. He drove away without turning on his headlights. I finally picked up my tea. It was ice cold, but it tasted like victory. He hadn't just broken into my house. He had broken into a trap that proved intent. He wasn't checking on a senile old man. He was stealing. And now I had the video evidence of him cracking a safe that he had no legal right to touch. But the night wasn't over. The die was just the appetizer. Tomorrow was Chloe's big party, the party where they planned to announce my incompetence. I looked at the video file on my phone. Save. I imagined Brad trying to scrub that blue ink off his face. It would take turpentine and steel wool to get that off, and even then it would leave a stain, just like the stain on his soul. I went to bed. For the first time in weeks, I slept like a baby. The kind of deep, peaceful sleep you only get when you know the monsters under the bed are the ones who should be afraid of you. 2:14 in the morning, the witching hour, the time when good men are asleep and bad men think they are invisible. I was awake. I was lying in my bed under the quilt Sarah had stitched 20 years ago, holding my breath. The house was silent, but it was a deceptive silence. It was the silence of a held breath before the plunge. On my lap, the old Samsung tablet glowed with a ghostly green light. It was my window into the underworld. The screen showed a grainy night vision feed of my basement. It looked like the surface of the moon, gray and cold and lifeless, until a shadow moved across the floor. My heart didn't race, it didn't flutter. It beat with a slow, heavy rhythm. Thump, 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 like a war drum. The shadow resolved into a figure. It was Brad. He wasn't wearing his cheap suit tonight. He was dressed in black sweatpants and a dark hoodie pulled tight around his face. He looked like a caricature of a burglar, a desperate man playing a dangerous game. I watched him on the screen as he navigated the clutter of the basement. He moved with a frantic energy, jerking his head left and right, checking corners that he had already checked. He was terrified. Good. Fear makes you sloppy. Fear makes you grip the steering wheel too tight and miss the turn. He reached the furnace. He stopped. Behind the furnace, the heavy iron shape of the safe stood waiting. It was a beast of a thing, rusted and scarred from decades of neglect. I had bought it from a scrapyard specifically for this moment. It looked like it held secrets. It looked like it held fortune. Brad dropped to his knees in front of it. The camera angle was perfect. I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead even in the monochrome footage. I could see the way his hands shook. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. The combination. The numbers I had fed him through the wiretap. 24, 10, 19. He reached for the dial. I zoomed in on the tablet screen. He spun the dial to the right. He stopped. He spun it to the left. He stopped. He grabbed the handle and pulled. Nothing. The safe didn't open. I smiled in the darkness of my bedroom. I hadn't changed the combination. The numbers were correct. But what Brad didn't know was that the safe was 80 years old. The tumblers were sticky. You didn't just dial the numbers, you had to massage them. You had to jiggle the handle. You had to listen for the click. It required patience. It required a touch. Brad didn't have patience. He had $200,000 of debt breathing down his neck. He tried again, faster this time, spinning the dial like a roulette wheel. He pulled the handle again, harder. He grunted. I could see the veins popping in his neck, still locked. He kicked the safe. A silent impact on the screen, but I felt the vibration through the floorboards. "Open, you piece of junk," he mouthed. I could read his lips. He stood up, pacing in a small circle. He looked at his watch. He looked at the ceiling toward where I was sleeping. He was calculating the risk. Then he reached into a duffel bag he had dragged in with him. He didn't pull out a stethoscope like a movie cat burglar. He pulled out a cordless angle grinder. My eyes widened. He was going to cut it. He was going to brute force his way into my life savings. I watched as he put on a pair of safety goggles. At least he cared about his eyes, even if he didn't care about his soul. He pressed the button. The disc spun up to a blur. He touched it to the hinges of the safe. Sparks. A shower of white-hot sparks erupted in the dark basement, lighting up the room like a strobing disco. I tensed up, waiting for the noise. Angle grinders are loud. They scream like banshees. But from my bedroom 2 floors up, it was just a faint, high-pitched whine, like a mosquito in the distance. The basement walls were thick concrete, and the old furnace acted as a sound buffer. I watched him work. He was sweating profusely now. The sparks were bouncing off his clothes, off his face. He didn't stop. He was a man possessed. He saw the gold at the end of the rainbow, and he was willing to burn down the rainbow to get it. It took him 10 minutes. 10 minutes of grinding. 10 minutes of destruction. Finally, the top hinge gave way with a snap, then the bottom one. He dropped the grinder. It clattered to the floor. He was panting. He wiped his forehead with his sleeve, smearing soot across his face. He grabbed a crowbar from his bag. He jammed it into the gap where the hinges used to be. He heaved. The heavy iron door groaned. It tilted. It fell forward with a crash that definitely shook the house. I sat up in bed. If he had any sense, he would freeze. He would wait to see if I woke up, but he didn't wait. He didn't care. The door was down. The prize was exposed. He shone his flashlight into the cavity of the safe. There it was. The stack of cash. Thick, green, beautiful. I saw his body language change instantly. The tension vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated greed. He dropped the crowbar. He reached in with both hands, his fingers spread wide, ready to grab his salvation. He grabbed the stack, and then the world turned blue. The die pack was a little masterpiece of engineering. I'd gotten the canister from an old buddy of mine who used to service ATMs back in the 90s. It was expired, but pressurized chemicals don't really care about expiration dates. When Brad pulled the money, he pulled the pin. Whoosh! It wasn't an explosion like a bomb. It was a violent sneeze of pressurized mist. A cloud of methyl violet dye erupted from the center of the cash stack. It hit Brad square in the chest. It sprayed up into his face. It covered his hands. He fell backward, screaming silently, clawing at his eyes. On the night vision camera, the dye looked black. It coated him like oil. He looked like a creature from a swamp. He rolled on the floor, coughing, spitting, wiping his face. But you don't wipe this stuff off. It isn't watercolor paint. It stains skin for weeks. It ruins clothes forever. He scrambled to his knees, looking at his hands. He rubbed them on his pants, but the stain just spread. He looked back at the safe. The money was destroyed, soaked in blue ink. He crawled back toward the pile, snatching up a handful of bills, trying to find a dry one, trying to find anything he could use. He brought the bills close to his flashlight. He froze. He saw the text. For motion picture use only. He stared at the fake money. Then he stared at the camera lens in the corner of the room. He didn't see the lens, but he felt the eyes. He realized in that second that this wasn't bad luck. This wasn't a malfunction. This was a setup. He stood up, staggering like a drunk. He was blue from the waist up. He looked ridiculous. He looked pathetic. He looked like exactly what he was, a thief caught in a mousetrap. He didn't take the money. He didn't take the tools. He turned and ran. He scrambled up the wooden stairs, leaving a trail of dark droplets behind him. He burst out of the bulkhead door and into the night. I watched on the screen until the basement was empty again, save for the broken safe and the scattered blue paper. I didn't reach for the phone to call 911. My finger hovered over the dial pad, but I pulled it back. If I called the police now, they would arrest him. They would take him to the station. He would be booked for burglary. But that was too easy. That was private. That was a legal matter between a man and his son-in-law. No. I wanted more. I wanted Chloe to see this. I wanted his business partners to see this. I wanted the neighbors who thought he was a successful real estate mogul to see this. I wanted the ending to be public. I tapped the screen on the tablet. Save video. Export to cloud. I watched the progress bar load. 20%, 50%, 100%. The evidence was secure. The trap had snapped shut. I got out of bed and walked to the window. I looked down at the driveway. There were faint, dark spots on the concrete where he had run to his car. I went into the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked old. My hair was gray. My face was lined, but my eyes were bright. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. They are wrong. Revenge is a dish best served in front of an audience. I went back to bed. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow was the party. The invitations had been sent. The caterers were booked. The guests were coming to say goodbye to Booker, the senile old man. Instead, they were going to meet Booker, the executioner. I fell asleep listening to the phantom sound of a grinder cutting through metal and the beautiful silence of a trap springing shut. The house smelled of barbecue ribs and potato salad, but underneath the aroma of comfort food was the stench of betrayal. My living room was packed. Chloe had gone all out. She had invited everyone. My cousin Martha from the South Side, Deacon Wilson from the church, even my old foreman from the plant, a man I hadn't seen in 5 years. They were all standing around holding paper plates and plastic cups, speaking in hushed tones. When I walked into the room, the conversation died instantly. It was like someone had cut the power to a conveyor belt. All eyes turned to me. They weren't looking at Booker the friend or Booker the deacon. They were looking at Booker the invalid, Booker the tragedy. I saw the pity in their eyes. It is a terrible thing to see pity in the eyes of people you respect. It strips you naked. It takes away your history and leaves only your decline. Chloe rushed over to me. She was wearing a white dress again, looking innocent and pure. She grabbed my arm with a grip that was a little too tight. "Dad," she said loud enough for the back of the room to hear. "Look who is here. Everyone came to see you. Isn't that nice?" She spoke to me like I was a toddler who had just woken up from a nap. Slow, enunciated, condescending. I smiled. It was the hardest smile I ever had to fake. "Hello, everyone," I said, my voice raspy. "It is good to see you. I didn't know we were having a party." I saw Martha exchange a look with Deacon Wilson, a look that said, "See, he doesn't even know what day it is." Chloe led me to the big armchair in the corner. She sat me down like a prop. "You just sit here, Dad. Rest your legs. Brad will get you a plate. We don't want you getting dizzy again." Ah, yes, the dizziness. The side effect of the sugar pills she thought I was taking. I sat back and watched the room. I was the guest of honor at my own funeral. Then I saw Brad. He was standing near the kitchen door trying to look invisible. He was wearing a long-sleeved shirt buttoned to the neck despite the heat of the crowded room. And on his hands, he was wearing gloves. Not medical gloves, not winter gloves. He was wearing sleek black leather driving gloves, inside the house, while eating ribs. It was so ridiculous I almost laughed out loud. He caught my eye. He didn't smile. He looked terrified. His eyes were darting around the room, scanning for danger. He looked like a man who expected the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He walked over to me holding a plate of food. He held the plate awkwardly, trying not to bend his fingers too much. The blue dye from the safe explosion would be deep into his pores by now. It would be under his fingernails. It would be stained into his skin like a tattoo of his guilt. "Here you go, Booker," he mumbled, not making eye contact. "Eat up." "Nice gloves, Brad," I said loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "New style." He flinched. He nearly dropped the potato salad. "Yeah," he stammered. I have a dermatitis flare-up. The doctor said I need to keep my hands covered. No sunlight, no irritants." "Is that right?" I said, leaning in. "Must be painful. You look a little blue around the gills, son." He froze. He looked at me, searching my face for a double meaning, but I kept my expression blank. Just a confused old man making conversation. He walked away, quickly disappearing into the crowd. I ate my food slowly. I watched them work the room. Chloe was a master. She moved from group to group, touching arms, whispering secrets, shaking her head with sad resignation. I could imagine the script. "It has gotten so bad, Aunt Martha. He leaves the stove on. He wanders in the park for hours. We are just so worried, Deacon. We can't watch him 24/7. He needs professional help." She was building a consensus. She was recruiting a jury. If she could get the church and the family on her side, nobody would question the conservatorship. They would think she was a saint making a hard sacrifice. An hour later, the moment arrived. Chloe tapped a spoon against her wine glass. Cling, cling, cling. The room quieted down. The music was turned off. The heavy silence returned. Chloe stood in the center of the room. She looked at Brad, who was standing by the wall nursing a beer with his gloved hands. Then she looked at me. She took a deep breath, and I saw tears well up in her eyes. Real tears. Fake tears. With Chloe, it didn't matter. The effect was the same. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice trembling. "I know this was last minute, but Brad and we needed family tonight. We needed our village." She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. "You all know my father. You know Booker. He has been the rock of this family for 40 years. He is the strongest man I know." A murmur of agreement went through the room. "But even rocks erode," she continued, "and it breaks my heart to say this, but our rock is crumbling." She looked at me with such profound sadness that for a second even I almost believed her. Over the last few months we have seen a decline, a rapid, terrifying decline. It started with small things, forgetting names, losing keys, but then it got dangerous. She took a step toward the crowd, pleading her case. Last week he wandered away from the house. He was lost in Washington Park for hours. Brad had to go find him. He didn't know where his truck was. He didn't know how to get home. He was confused and scared. I saw Cousin Martha cover her mouth with her hand. And yesterday was the breaking point, she sobbed. The doctor confirmed it. Early onset dementia. He is losing his cognitive functions. He is mixing up his medications. If Brad hadn't checked his pill bottles, Dad could have died. A gasp went through the room. Brad nodded solemnly from the corner, adjusting his leather gloves. "We have tried," she said. "God knows we have tried to care for him here. But this house, this big empty house, it is a death trap for him now. The stairs, the stove, it is too much. We can't keep him safe here anymore." She turned to me. "Dad, I love you. We love you. And because we love you, we have to make a hard decision." She reached into her purse and pulled out a glossy brochure. She held it up like it was a ticket to paradise. "We found a place. Sunset Haven. It is beautiful. They have nurses 24 hours a day. They have activities. You will be safe there. You will never be lost again." She walked over to me and knelt down. She put her hand on my knee. "We are filing the paperwork tomorrow, Dad, for your safety. We are going to sell the house to pay for your care. It is the only way." She looked up at the crowd seeking their validation. "I know it is hard," she said to them, "but does anyone think we are doing the wrong thing? Please tell me if there is another way, because we are desperate." The room was silent. Then Deacon Wilson cleared his throat. "Chloe, child," he said, his voice deep and rumbling, "we know you love your father. If the doctor says it is time, then maybe it is time. We will pray for him, and for you." Martha nodded, wiping her eyes. "You are a good daughter, Chloe," she said. "A good daughter to take this burden on." Chloe smiled through her tears, a brave, tragic smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means the world to us." She stood up. She had won. She had the family. She had the church. She had the narrative. She looked at Brad. He gave a small nod. The heist was complete. They had stolen my life in front of 50 witnesses, and everyone was applauding their bravery. Chloe looked down at me. "Dad," she said softly, "do you understand? It is for the best." I looked at her. I looked at the brochure for Sunset Haven. It looked like a prison with nicer landscaping. I looked at Brad, sweating in his leather gloves. I looked at my friends and family, their faces full of sorrow for the man they thought was gone. I slowly reached into my pocket. I didn't pull out a handkerchief. I didn't pull out glasses. I pulled out my phone. The room was quiet, waiting for me to speak, waiting for the confused old man to accept his fate. I cleared my throat. The raspy voice was gone. "Actually, Chloe," I said, my voice booming with the authority of a man who used to command a floor of 200 workers. "I think there is another way." Chloe frowned. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "Dad, please don't make a scene," she hissed. "Oh, I am not making a scene," I said, standing up. I stood tall. My back was straight. My eyes were clear. "I am making a presentation." I tapped the screen of my phone. Behind me on the wall, mounted flat-screen TV, the image flickered. It changed from the black screen to a bright, clear interface. "Before you send me to the glue factory," I said, walking toward the television, "I think everyone here should see a little home movie I put together. It is a feature film about a daughter's love and a son-in-law's debt." I looked at Brad. "Brad, run," I said calmly. He didn't run. He couldn't move. He was frozen. I pressed play, and the silence in the room changed. It wasn't the silence of pity anymore. It was the silence of a bomb about to go off. I stood next to the 65-inch television screen that dominated the living room wall. It was the only luxury item I had purchased for myself in the last decade, a retirement gift to watch the Bears play on Sundays. Now it was about to become the most expensive cinema screen in Chicago. Chloe made a move to stop me. She stepped forward, her heels clicking nervously on the hardwood floor. Her hand reached out, not in affection, but in a desperate attempt to control the narrative. "Dad," she said, her voice tight and high-pitched, "you don't know how to work that. You will break something. Please just sit down. The car for the nursing home will be here in the morning. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at her. I didn't see the little girl in pigtails anymore. I saw a stranger. "Sit down, Chloe," I said. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice. I used the tone I used to use when a forklift driver was operating unsafely on the loading dock. It was a tone that brokered no argument. It was the voice of absolute authority. She froze. The command in my voice confused her. She looked at Brad for backup, but Brad was currently trying to make himself disappear into the drywall. I reached behind the television. My hand found the HDMI cable instantly. I didn't fumble. I didn't ask which port was which. I plugged the cable into the adapter on my phone with a solid mechanical click. The screen flickered. The image of the input menu disappeared, replaced by the sharp, high-definition mirror of my phone screen. The room was deadly silent. 50 people were holding their breath. Cousin Martha had lowered her fork. Deacon Wilson was leaning forward, adjusting his glasses. I opened the File Manager app. "You said I was confused, Chloe." I began addressing the room, but keeping my eyes on the screen. "You said I was losing my mind, that I couldn't handle my finances, that I was a danger to myself." I tapped the first file. An image filled the screen. It was a bar graph. Bright red bars towering over small green ones. "Let's talk about finances," I said. "This is a credit report. But it isn't mine. My credit score is 810. I have never missed a payment in 50 years. This report belongs to the man standing in the corner wearing leather gloves in July." I pointed a finger at Brad Patterson. Total unsecured debt, $214,000. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It sounded like a vacuum seal breaking. I swiped to the next image. "This is an email from a collection agency called Apex Collections. They are threatening to break his legs if he doesn't pay $50,000 by the end of the month." I looked at Deacon Wilson. "Deacon, you preach about stewardship. Does this look like the financial profile of a man who should be managing my estate?" Brad stepped forward, his face a mask of panic and sweat. "This is fake," he shouted, his voice cracking. "He made this up. He is senile. He doesn't even know how to use Photoshop." I didn't answer him. I just swiped again. The screen changed. Now it showed a map of Chicago, a Google Maps timeline. "You said I was wandering, Brad," I said calmly. "You said I was lost. You said you had to come find me." I zoomed in on the map. "This is the tracking data from Tuesday. The blue dot is me. I was at the grocery store buying bread. But look at this red dot. This is your phone, Brad." I tapped the screen. While I was at the store, the red dot was in my kitchen. I swiped again. Wednesday. I was at the park. The red dot was in my bathroom. Thursday. I was at the mechanic. The red dot was in my basement. I turned to the crowd. My son-in-law wasn't saving me. He was breaking into my house every time I left. He was the one moving the keys. He was the one putting the milk in the pantry. He was the ghost haunting this house. Chloe screamed. It was a shrill primal sound. "Stop it! Stop this right now! He is lying. He hacked our phones. He is crazy!" She lunged toward the TV, trying to pull the cable out. But Cousin Martha was faster. She stood up and blocked Chloe's path. "Martha is a big woman who raised 5 boys. She didn't move an inch. Let him finish." "Chloe," Martha said, her voice low and dangerous. "Let the man finish." Chloe stopped, panting, staring at Martha, then at me. I looked at my daughter. "You want to know why I'm doing this, Chloe?" I asked softly. "It is not because of the money. I would have given you the money if you asked. It is because of the disrespect." I tapped the final file. It wasn't an image. It was an audio waveform. "You gave me these earbuds for my birthday," I said, holding up the white case. "You said they were for my safety. You used the live listen feature to spy on me. You wanted to hear me falling apart." I pressed the play button. But the thing about microphones is that they don't discriminate. They pick up everything, including the things you say when you think I am asleep. The audio began to play through the surround sound speakers. The quality was crystal clear. It was the acoustics of a car interior. Brad's voice filled the room. "I am telling you, Chloe, the old man is taking too long to die. At this rate, he is going to outlive the loan sharks." The room went cold, ice cold. Chloe's voice replied, "Don't worry, babe. The sugar pills will mess him up. His pressure was 180 yesterday. If he doesn't have a stroke soon, we will just put him in the home. Once he is in Sunset Haven, we have power of attorney. We sell the house the next day." Brad's voice laughed. "God, I can't wait to dump him there. He smells like old soup and despair. Just sign the papers and let him rot." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. I looked at the faces in the room. Deacon Wilson was standing up slowly, his face a mask of righteous fury. Martha was crying, her hand over her mouth, looking at Chloe like she was looking at a monster. My old foreman was clenching his fists, looking ready to throw Brad through the window. Brad was leaning against the wall, shaking. He looked like he was going to vomit. The blue dye under his gloves seemed to be seeping into his bloodstream, poisoning him from the inside out. Chloe stood in the center of the room. Her face was pale. dead white. All the blood had drained away, leaving her looking like a ghost. She looked at the guests, then she looked at me. "Dad," she whispered. "Dad, that was taken out of context. We were just venting. We didn't mean it." I looked at her. My heart broke. It truly did. Because somewhere inside that woman was the little girl I had carried on my shoulders. But she was gone. She had been consumed by greed and envy. Out of context, I repeated. I swiped the screen one last time. An image appeared. It was a photo of the pill bottle, the one Brad had tampered with. "This is the bottle of lisinopril from my medicine cabinet," I said. "I had the contents analyzed at a lab yesterday." I zoomed in on the lab report. 99% sucrose, sugar. "You swapped my heart medication for candy," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "That is not out of context, Chloe. That is attempted murder." Brad bolted. He pushed off the wall, knocking over a vase of flowers. He scrambled toward the front door, slipping on the hardwood floor, his leather gloves scrabbling for purchase. He didn't care about Chloe. He didn't care about the house. He just wanted to get away from the evidence, away from the eyes of the people who now knew exactly what he was. He reached the front door. He grabbed the handle and yanked it open. But he didn't get far, because standing on the porch, framed by the flashing red and blue lights of 3 patrol cars, were 2 uniformed officers and my lawyer, Solomon Steinberg. I unplugged the phone from the TV. The screen went black. The presentation was over. I looked at Chloe, who had collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing into her hands. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a deep, hollow sadness. But beneath the sadness was the solid steel of justice. I walked over to the window and watched as the officers stepped into the hallway, blocking Brad's escape. "Happy birthday to me," I whispered. The blue lights from the police cruisers outside were pulsing through the sheer curtains, washing the living room in a rhythmic strobe of red and blue. It looked like a heartbeat, a warning. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the police officers at the door hadn't moved yet. They were waiting. Everyone was waiting. They were waiting for the old man to sit down. They were waiting for the show to be over. But I wasn't done. I looked at Chloe curled up on the sofa. She looked small. She looked like the child who used to scrape her knees playing on the sidewalk. But I had to remind myself that she wasn't a child. She was a woman who had plotted to erase me from my own life. I reached into my pocket one last time. My hand closed around the smooth white plastic of the charging case. It felt cold. It felt heavy. I pulled it out and held it up. The little white box caught the light from the television screen. I walked toward Chloe. I didn't rush. I walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a foreman inspecting a failed assembly line. "Do you know what the irony is, Chloe?" I asked, my voice soft but cutting through the silence like a razor. She didn't look up. She was rocking back and forth, crying into her hands. "The irony is that this was a good gift." I turned the case over in my fingers. "You gave me this because you wanted to tether me. You wanted a leash. You wanted to hear if I was cracking. You wanted to hear the sound of my mind breaking so you could record it and play it for a judge." I took a step closer. "But you forgot something about technology, baby girl. You forgot that connections go 2 ways. I looked at the crowd. When Chloe set this up, she was in a hurry. She was so eager to get to her dinner reservation, so eager to start the surveillance, that she made a mistake. A rookie mistake. A mistake that would get you fired on day 1 in the warehouse. I looked back at her. "You logged into your own iCloud account on my phone to pair the device, Chloe, and you forgot to log out." Her head snapped up. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed, and terrified. She knew. In that split second, she knew exactly what I had. "You didn't just share the device," I continued. "You synced the library. You synced the voice memos. You synced the entire history of your digital life to the phone in the pocket of the man you were trying to destroy." I tapped my phone screen again. The waveform image on the TV changed. This wasn't a recording from a car. This was a voice memo, dated 3 weeks ago. The file name was simply "The Plan." I looked at Deacon Wilson. "Deacon, you have known me for 30 years. You know I don't believe in eavesdropping. A man's word is his bond. But when the wolves are at the door, you don't close your eyes. You listen to how they plan to eat you." I pressed play. The sound that came out of the speakers was crisp. It was recorded in a quiet room, probably their bedroom. First came the sound of paper shuffling, then Chloe's voice. calm, calculating. Not the hysterical woman sobbing on the couch, but a cold executive planning a merger. Okay, so the notary is the problem, her voice said on the recording. We can't get him to sign the deed if he is lucid. The notary will ask questions. Then came Brad's voice. I have a guy, Brad said. Jimmy from the poker game. He has a notary stamp. He doesn't care who signs what as long as he gets $500. But the signature, Chloe said. Dad has that specific loop on the B. If the bank checks it against his file. I have been practicing, Brad interrupted. Look. There was a pause on the recording. The sound of a pen scratching on paper. Scratch. 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 That is pretty good, Chloe said. Her voice sounded impressed. That looks exactly like it. I told you, Brad said, laughing. I have been studying his checks for a month. Once we get the conservatorship, I sign the transfer. Jimmy stamps it. We sell to Stephen the next day. The old man will be in the nursing home before the ink is dry. What if he resists? Chloe asked. Let him resist, Brad sneered. Who are they going to believe? A successful real estate agent and a loving daughter, or a crazy old man who thinks his keys are in the fridge? We own him, Chloe. We own him. The recording ended with the sound of them kissing, a wet, sickening sound of victory. I stopped the playback. I looked at the room. If the air had been cold before, it was freezing now. Cousin Martha was standing up. Her hands were shaking. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Chloe. You forged his name, Martha whispered. The horror in her voice was absolute. You were going to sell his house out from under him with a fake signature. Deacon Wilson stepped forward. He leaned on his cane, his face dark with judgment. Honor thy father and thy mother, he boomed, his voice shaking the walls. That is the commandment. Not steal from them, not lie to them, not bury them before they are dead. He looked at Chloe with a disappointment that was worse than anger. I held you when you were a baby, he said. I baptized you. And now I see a stranger. Chloe looked around the room. She saw no allies. She saw no pity. She saw only the reflection of her own sins in the eyes of the people she had tried to manipulate. She looked at me. Dad, she choked out. Dad, please. We were desperate. The guys were coming for Brad. We didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, Chloe. I said, my voice tired. You could have asked me. If you had come to me and said, Dad, we are in trouble. Dad, we made mistakes. I would have yelled. I would have been disappointed. But I would have helped, because that is what fathers do. I threw the earbud case onto the coffee table. It landed with a hollow clatter. But you didn't want a father. You wanted a victim. Suddenly there was movement in the hallway. Brad. He had been pinned by the police officers, but the sound of the recording, the sound of his own voice plotting a felony, had snapped something inside him. He wasn't thinking anymore. He was acting on pure animal instinct. He shoved the officer to the left. He lunged into the living room. His eyes were wild. His face was streaked with sweat and blue dye. He looked like a demon unhinged. Give me that phone, he screamed. He didn't run for the door. He ran for me. He ran for the evidence. In his twisted mind, if he destroyed the phone, he destroyed the crime. He covered the distance in 2 seconds. The guests screamed. Martha shouted my name. But I didn't move. I stood my ground. I planted my feet the way I used to plant them on the loading dock when a heavy crate was swinging too close. Brad reached me. He grabbed for the phone in my hand. Give it to me, you old bastard, he yelled. His leather-gloved hand clawed at my wrist. But he forgot something. He forgot that while he spent his days sitting in a car and playing poker, I spent 40 years lifting steel. I spent 40 years wrestling machinery. My joints might ache and my walk might be slow, but my grip was still iron. I caught his wrist with my free hand. I squeezed. I squeezed with the anger of the sugar pills. I squeezed with the anger of the fake safe. I squeezed with the anger of a man who had been underestimated for the last time. Brad gasped. His eyes bulged. He tried to pull away, but he couldn't. I held him there, locked in place. I looked him right in the eye. You want the phone, Brad? I asked, my voice calm, terrifyingly calm amidst the chaos. I shoved him back. Not a punch. A shove. A controlled release of power. He stumbled backward. He tripped over the edge of the rug. He fell hard, landing on his back, right at the feet of the police officers. The officers were on him in a second. Knees on his back, hands pulled behind him. I watched as they cuffed him. The click of the metal handcuffs echoed in the room. It was a final sound, the period at the end of a long, ugly sentence. "Get off me!" Brad screamed, his face pressed into the hardwood floor. "It is a lie. That recording is fake. He used AI. He is crazy." "Officer, take him away," I said, turning my back on him. I looked at the television screen. The waveform of their betrayal was still there, frozen in time. I unplugged the phone. The screen went black. I looked at my guests, my community. They were shocked. They were hurt. But they were looking at me with a new respect. They weren't seeing a fragile senior citizen anymore. They were seeing Booker Coleman, the man who survived. I walked over to the armchair and sat down. My legs were trembling a little now that the adrenaline was fading. Martha walked over and sat on the arm of the chair. She put her arm around my shoulders. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I looked at Chloe. She was staring at the empty doorway where her husband had just been dragged out. The police officer stepped into the room. He looked at me. "Mr. Coleman," he said respectfully, "we have enough for the arrest, but we will need that phone as evidence." I handed it to him. "Take it," I said. "I don't need it anymore." I looked at the earbuds case on the table. "And take those too," I added. "I prefer my music from the radio." The officer bagged the phone and the earbuds. The party was over. The cake hadn't been cut. The ribs were cold, but the air was clean. For the first time in months, the air in my house was clean. I took a deep breath. It tasted like freedom. The silence that followed the click of the handcuffs was heavy enough to crush a man. Brad was face down on my hardwood floor, his cheek pressed against the varnish, his hands cuffed behind his back. The blue dye from the safe was smeared across his face, and now it was staining my floor, a permanent mark of his greed. He wasn't screaming anymore. He was panting, making small animal noises of panic as the reality of his situation settled in. Chloe was frozen near the sofa. Her hands were covering her mouth, her eyes darting between her husband on the floor and the two police officers standing like statues in my hallway. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck waiting for the impact. One of the guests, my cousin Martha, finally broke the silence. She stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Booker," she asked, looking at the police officers. "Did you call them just now? How did they get here so fast?" I looked at Martha. Then I looked at the crowd of family and friends who were staring at me with a mixture of awe and fear. I straightened my jacket. I felt a calm settle over me, the kind of calm I used to feel when a complex shipment finally left the loading dock sealed and verified. "I didn't call them just now, Martha," I said, my voice steady. "In logistics, you don't wait for the accident to happen before you call the safety crew. You schedule the arrival." I pointed to the grandfather clock in the corner. "I called the precinct at 6 o'clock this evening. I told them that a felony was in progress and that I had the perpetrators on site. They have been parked down the street for 30 minutes waiting for my signal. When I plugged the phone into the TV, that was the signal. I turned to the doorway where Solomon Steinberg was standing. My lawyer looked small in his oversized coat, but to anyone who knew the law, he was a giant. He stepped into the room holding a thick leather briefcase. He didn't look at the guests. He looked straight at Brad and Chloe. "Solomon," I said, "why don't you explain to my son-in-law why he is wearing steel bracelets at a family party?" Solomon adjusted his glasses. He walked over to Brad, looking down at him with the dispassionate gaze of a coroner examining a corpse. "Mr. Patterson," Solomon began, his voice dry and scratchy, "you might be under the impression that this is a domestic dispute. You might think the police will tell you to take a walk and cool off. You would be wrong." Brad tried to lift his head. "This is a misunderstanding," Brad wheezed, spitting a little saliva onto the floor. "I live here. This is my father-in-law. I was just trying to get my phone back," Officer Solomon said, nodding to the larger of the two policemen. "Please read the charges." The officer pulled a notebook from his pocket. He was a young man with a jaw like a brick. He read from the page in a monotone voice that made the words sound even more terrifying. "Bradley Patterson, you are under arrest for burglary in the second degree related to the forced entry of a secured safe within this residence on the night of July 14th. We have video evidence of the break-in and forensic evidence on your person." The officer pointed to the blue dye covering Brad's hands and face. "That dye is chemically unique, Mr. Patterson. It matches the canister in Mr. Coleman's safe. You are literally caught red-handed, or in this case, blue-handed." "But that is the least of your worries," Solomon interrupted. He walked over to the coffee table and picked up the white case of earbuds. He held it up to the light, turning it slowly. This little device changes everything. Solomon turned to Chloe. She flinched as if he had thrown a stone at her. Mrs. Patterson, he said, in the state of Illinois, recording a private conversation without the consent of all parties is a crime. But you didn't just record a conversation. You used a transmission device to intercept oral communications on a continuous basis. You turned your father's phone into a listening post. Solomon let the words hang in the air. That is a violation of the Federal Wiretap Act. It is not a local misdemeanor. It is a federal felony. It carries a prison sentence of up to 5 years per count. And since we have logs showing you listened in over 50 times in the last 3 days, you can do the math. Chloe's knees gave out. She didn't fall gracefully. She crumbled, sinking onto the sofa as if her bones had turned to water. I didn't know, she sobbed, her voice high and thin. It was just an app. I didn't know it was federal. Dad, please tell them. I just wanted to make sure you were safe. I looked at her. I really looked at her. This woman who had sat at my table, who had eaten my food, who had smiled while she plotted to put me in a cage. Ignorance of the law is not a defense, Chloe, I said, and neither is stupidity. But we are not done, Solomon said, his voice hardening. There is a third charge, and this is the one that is going to make sure you don't get bail. Solomon reached into his briefcase and pulled out the lab report for the pills. He held it up for the room to see. Attempted aggravated battery of a senior citizen. Solomon announced, by swapping out life-saving heart medication for sugar pills, you knowingly and intentionally created a life-threatening situation for a vulnerable adult. You didn't just want his money. You were gambling with his life. That is a Class 2 felony. The room erupted. My neighbors, the people I had lived beside for 40 years, began to shout. I heard the word monster used more than once. I saw Deacon Wilson shaking his head, tears of anger in his eyes. This wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It was a public shaming. Brad started to struggle. He kicked his legs, his boots scraping against the floor. You can't do this, he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. It was her idea. It was Chloe. She told me to switch the pills. She said he wouldn't notice. I just wanted the money for the loan sharks. She is the one who wanted him dead. Chloe shrieked. It was a sound of pure betrayal. You liar, she screamed back, jumping up from the sofa. You said it was easy. You said we had to do it. Don't you pin this on me. I watched them turn on each other. It took less than 5 minutes. The love, the partnership, the marriage, it all dissolved the moment the pressure was applied. They were rats in a bucket climbing over each other to escape the rising water. Officers, I said, my voice cutting through their screaming match, please remove them from my house. They are upsetting my guests. The officers hoisted Brad to his feet. He couldn't stand straight. He was hunched over, defeated the blue dye, making him look like a tragic clown. As they dragged him toward the door, he looked back at me. His eyes were wide, pleading. Booker, please, he begged. The guys I owe money to. If I go to jail, they can't get to me. But if I get out, Booker, help me. I looked at him. You should have thought about that before you picked up the angle grinder, Brad, I said. You are safer in jail than you are with your creditors. Consider this my final gift to you. I saved your life. They marched him out the front door. The flashing lights from the cruisers painted his face in strobes of red and blue as they shoved him into the back seat. Then the second officer turned to Chloe. Mrs. Patterson, he said, stand up and put your hands behind your back. Chloe shook her head. No, please. Daddy. She looked at me. She used the name she hadn't used in 20 years. Daddy. She wanted the man who used to check under her bed for monsters, but she had become the monster. I stood there leaning against the television, my arms crossed. Daddy, tell them to stop, she cried, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. I am your daughter. You can't let them take me to jail. Not tonight. Not in front of everyone. I walked over to her. I stood close enough to smell the expensive perfume she had bought with the money she borrowed from me last month. I am not sending you to jail, Chloe, I said softly. You sent yourself. You signed the admission form the minute you decided that my life was worth less than your comfort. I signaled to the officer, do what you have to do. The officer stepped forward. He pulled her arms back. The click of the handcuffs on her wrists was quieter than Brad's, but it hurt me more. It was the sound of a failure. Not my failure, but the failure of a bloodline. They walked her out. She was wailing now, a low, mournful sound that echoed through the house. The guests parted like the Red Sea to let them pass. No one touched her. No one offered a comforting word. They just watched. I followed them to the porch. I stood on the top step, the master of my domain. I watched as they put my daughter into the second cruiser. I watched as the doors slammed shut. The neighbors were all out on their lawns now. Mrs. Higgins from next door was in her bathrobe. The kids down the street were filming with their phones. This was the payoff. This was the grand finale I had promised myself. Solomon stepped up beside me. He watched the cars pull away, sirens wailing into the Chicago night. "That went well," he said, lighting a cigar. I looked at the empty street. "It went exactly according to the manifest, Saul," I said. I looked down at my hand. I was still holding the remote control for the TV. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The heavy weight of the last 3 months, the fear of the sugar pills, the paranoia of the missing keys, it was all gone. But in its place was a quiet space. A space where a family used to be. I turned back to the open door. My guests were still there, shell-shocked. I walked back inside. "Who wants cake?" I asked. It was a strange thing to ask, but I needed to do something normal. I needed to cut something other than ties. I walked to the dining table where the untouched birthday cake sat. It said, "Happy 70th Birthday Booker" in blue icing. I picked up the knife. My hand was steady. I cut a slice. "I am 70 years old," I said to the silent room. "I have lost my wife. I have lost my daughter. But I have not lost my mind. And tonight I think that is enough to celebrate." Deacon Wilson walked over. He picked up a plate. "Cut me a big slice, Booker," he said. "And let's put some jazz on. It is too quiet in here." I smiled. It was a real smile this time. I walked over to my stereo. I didn't reach for the earbuds. I reached for a vinyl record. Coltrane. I dropped the needle. The warm crackle of the record filled the room, chasing away the cold, digital silence of the wiretap. The police had done their job. The lawyers would do theirs. But for tonight, I was just a man listening to music in his own house, surrounded by people who didn't need a GPS tracker to know where I was. I was home. The officer holding Brad by the arm was a veteran. I could tell by the way he stood balanced and ready for anything. He looked down at Brad's hands, still encased in those ridiculous black leather driving gloves. It was 80 degrees in Chicago. The air conditioning in my house was working fine, but Brad was sweating like he was running a marathon in a sauna. Officer Miller, the one with the brick jaw, frowned. He reached out and grabbed Brad's left wrist. "You have got some interesting fashion sense for a summer evening, Mr. Patterson," the officer said. His voice was flat professional, but laced with the kind of suspicion that comes from 20 years on the beat. "Why don't we take these off and see what you are hiding?" Brad pulled back. It was a violent, jerky motion. "No," he screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal. "You can't. I have a skin condition. It is contagious. I have dermatitis." I stood by the television watching the performance. It was pathetic. A skin condition. He was grasping at straws, trying to build a raft out of toothpicks while the Titanic was already underwater. Solomon Steinberg stepped forward. He didn't look at Brad. He looked at the officer. "Officer," he said calmly, "I believe you will find that the suspect's condition is not medical. It is criminal. That safe was rigged with a methyl violet dye pack, the kind banks use. It explodes on contact and stains the skin for a minimum of 3 weeks." The officer nodded. He didn't ask Brad for permission this time. He grabbed the glove by the fingertips. Brad thrashed, kicking out at the officer's shins, but the second officer stepped on his ankle, pinning him to the floor. "Hold still," the second officer barked. With a sharp tug, the left glove came off. The sound of the leather peeling away was followed by a collective gasp from the room that sucked all the oxygen out of the air. Brad's hand wasn't just blue. It was a deep, violent indigo. The dye had soaked into the cuticles, into the creases of his knuckles, into the very pores of his skin. It looked like he had dipped his hand into a vat of ink. It was the mark of a thief, a brand that screamed his guilt louder than any confession ever could. The officer pulled off the second glove. The right hand was even worse. The dye was darker here, almost black in the center of the palm where he had grabbed the money. "Well," Officer Miller said, holding up the blue hands for everyone to see, "I am no doctor, but that looks like a severe case of caught in the act." Brad slumped against the wall. The fight went out of him. He looked at his blue hands, staring at them as if they belonged to someone else. He knew it was over. There was no lawyer in the world who could explain away that stain. He was marked. I looked at Chloe. She was standing a few feet away watching her husband's destruction. I saw the gears turning in her head. I saw the calculation. She saw the ship sinking, and she made a decision. She wasn't going to go down with the captain. She let out a sob. It was a loud, theatrical sound that made me wince. "Oh my God," she cried, putting her hands to her face. "Brad, how could you?" She turned to me. She didn't walk. She threw herself across the room. She dropped to her knees right in front of me, heedless of her white dress, heedless of the hardwood floor. She grabbed the hem of my pants. "Dad," she wailed, looking up at me with eyes swimming in tears. "Dad, you have to believe me. I didn't know. I didn't know he was going to break in." I looked down at her. This was the woman who had rolled her eyes when I spoke, the woman who had treated me like a piece of furniture. Now she was clutching my leg like a toddler. "He forced me." "Dad," she pleaded, the words tumbling out over each other. "He has a gambling problem. You know that. He is aggressive. I was scared of him. He told me if I didn't help him get the house, he would hurt me. He made me put the tracking app on your phone. He made me switch the pills." She pointed a shaking finger at Brad, who was being hauled up by the officers. "It was all him. I am a victim here too, Dad. Please, tell them to let me go. I am your daughter. I am your little girl." Brad looked at her. His eyes bulged. "You lying witch," he screamed, spitting blue saliva. "You came up with the plan while we were watching Netflix. You said the old man was taking up too much space. You said you wanted the inheritance now while you were still young enough to enjoy it." "He made me do it," Chloe screamed back, drowning him out. I was terrified. She looked back at me, squeezing my leg tighter. "Dad, look at me. It is Chloe. I made a mistake staying with him, but I didn't do those things. I love you. I have always loved you. Don't let them take me." The room was silent. Everyone was looking at me. Cousin Martha had her hand over her mouth. Deacon Wilson was shaking his head slowly. They were waiting to see if the father would break. They were waiting to see if the tears of a daughter would wash away the sins of a stranger. I felt a ghost of a feeling in my chest, a memory of the day she was born. I remembered holding her, promising to protect her from the world. But then I remembered the sugar pills. I remembered the email in the trash folder. I remembered the cold, calculating voice on the recording. "Just sign the papers and let him rot." That wasn't fear. That was malice. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Chloe thought I was reaching for a handkerchief. She thought I was softening. A flicker of hope crossed her face. I pulled out a piece of paper. It was folded into a neat square. I unfolded it slowly. My hands were steady. "Get up, Chloe," I said. My voice wasn't angry. It was dead. It was the voice of a man reading a shipping manifest for a crate that had been lost at sea. She froze. The hope on her face faltered. "Dad," she whispered. I said, "Get up," I repeated. "You are ruining your dress. And you are ruining my floor with your lies." She slowly stood up, backing away from me, wiping her eyes. I held the paper up. "You say he forced you," I said, addressing the room but looking straight at her. "You say you didn't know about the plan. You say you were just a scared wife following orders." I turned the paper so she could read it. "This is a printout from your email trash folder, Chloe. I recovered it 3 days ago. It is a receipt from Best Buy, dated last week." I pointed to the line item. Apple AirPods Pro, quantity 1, paid for with a Visa card ending in 4099. "That is your card, Chloe, not Brad's, yours." I took a step toward her. She took a step back. "And here is the interesting part. You didn't just buy them. You paid for same-day shipping. You were in such a rush to start spying on me that you paid an extra $20 to get them here by my birthday." I flipped the page. "And this is a search history log from your iPad, the one you think you cleared. But nothing is ever really cleared, is it, Jamal?" I nodded to Jamal in the back of the room. He gave a grim nod. "Search terms from 2 weeks ago," I read aloud. "How to induce high blood pressure symptoms. Laws regarding conservatorship in Illinois. How to fake a signature on a deed." I lowered the paper. "Brad is a thief, Chloe. He is a greedy, desperate man with a gambling addiction. But he is not smart enough to plan this. He is the muscle. You were the architect." Chloe hit the wall. She had nowhere left to back up. The tears had stopped. The mask had fallen off completely. There was no fear in her eyes anymore. Only a cold, hard hatred. She looked at me like I was something she had stepped in. "You should have just died," she hissed. It was a low sound, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a gunshot. "You have had your life. Why couldn't you just give us what we needed? You are selfish. You are just a selfish old man sitting on a pile of money you can't even spend." The gasp from the crowd was audible. Cousin Martha looked like she was going to faint. I looked at her. I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange sense of relief. Finally, we were telling the truth. "I am not selfish, Chloe," I said softly. "I am a father, and a father's job is to teach his children. Sometimes you teach them how to ride a bike. Sometimes you teach them how to read." I signaled to the officer standing behind her. "And sometimes you have to teach them that actions have consequences." The officer stepped forward. He didn't ask her to turn around. He grabbed her arm and spun her. Chloe didn't fight. She went limp. The fight was gone. She knew the receipt was the nail in the coffin. "Officer," I said, as he clicked the handcuffs onto her wrists, "make sure you add that receipt to the evidence bag. It is the proof of premeditation." "I will, Mr. Coleman," the officer said. I looked at Chloe one last time as they began to lead her out. "You bought the listening device because you wanted to hear everything I said to her back. Well, listen to this. You are no longer my beneficiary. You are no longer my power of attorney. And as of this moment, you are no longer my daughter. You are just a defendant." She didn't look back. She kept her head down, her hair falling over her face, hiding the shame that I hoped she was finally feeling. I watched them go. I folded the receipt back up and put it in my pocket. It was just a piece of paper, but it weighed 1,000 pounds. I turned back to the room. My guests were staring at me. They looked terrified. They looked heartbroken. I walked over to the table and picked up my glass of iced tea. My hand trembled just a little. I took a sip. "It is done," I whispered to myself. "It is finally done." The house was empty of snakes. Now I just had to clean up the mess they left behind. The handcuffs made a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't a click. It was a snap, like a dry branch breaking in a dead forest. It was the sound of a life breaking into two distinct parts, the before and the after. Brad didn't take it well. Men like him never do. They spend their lives thinking the rules are suggestions, and that consequences are things that happen to other people. When the officer grabbed his wrist to pull his arms behind his back, Brad reacted with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. He spun around his face, a mask of blue dye and sweat, and tried to shove the officer away. "Get your hands off me!" he screamed, his voice shredding the silence of the room. "Do you know who I am? I am a real estate developer. This is my house. That old man is senile. He is lying." He threw a wild punch. It was clumsy. It was slow. The heavy leather glove sliced through the air but missed the officer by a foot. That was a mistake. The officer didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He just moved. It was a fluid, practiced motion. He stepped inside Brad's guard, grabbed his shoulder and his belt, and swept his leg. Brad went down hard. He hit the floor with a sickening thud. His cheek bounced off the hardwood, the same oak floorboards he had walked on an hour ago with muddy shoes, the same floorboards he had told me were buckling and rotting and needed to be replaced. I watched from my armchair. I watched my son-in-law's face press against the varnish of the house he wanted to sell. The officer dropped a knee into the center of Brad's back. Brad let out a wheezing gasp as the air left his lungs. "Stop fighting." The officer commanded, his voice calm and authoritative. "You are making this worse." "My floor seems sturdy enough to me, Brad," I said quietly. "It seems to be holding your weight just fine." Brad writhed on the ground, trying to buck the officer off, but the second officer had joined in grabbing his other arm. They wrenched his hands together. Click, click, click. The steel ratchets tightened. Brad stopped fighting. He lay there panting, his cheeks smashed against the wood, blowing dust bunnies across the floor. He looked up at me. His eyes weren't arrogant anymore. They were wet. They were terrified. "Booker," he whispered. "Booker, tell them. Tell them it was a prank." I didn't answer him. I just took a sip of my iced tea. The officers hauled him to his feet. He couldn't stand straight. The fight had left him. He slumped forward, the blue dye on his face, making him look like a bruised fruit. Then they turned to Chloe. She was standing by the fireplace, trembling so hard her white dress was vibrating. She looked at Brad with disgust. She looked at the handcuffs with horror. "Officer, please," she said, her voice tiny and fragile. "I need to get my purse. I need to call my lawyer. I can't go like this. I am barefoot. You can call your lawyer from the station." "Ma'am," the officer said, stepping toward her. "Turn around." "No," she whimpered, backing away until she hit the mantel. "No, you don't understand. I am a mother. Well, I mean, I want to be a mother. I am a respectable woman. I am the victim here." She looked at the guests. She looked at Deacon Wilson. "Deacon, please," she begged. Tell them I am a good person." Deacon Wilson looked at her. He leaned on his cane, his face filled with a sorrow so deep it looked painful. "A good person doesn't try to bury her father while he is still breathing, child," he said softly. The officer took her wrist. She didn't fight like Brad. She collapsed. She went boneless. The officer had to hold her up as he clicked the cuffs onto her wrists. She started to wail. It wasn't a scream. It was a high, thin, keening sound, the sound of a child who realizes the dark is real. "Let's go," the officer said. They began the march, the walk of shame. They led them through the living room, past the coffee table where the birthday cake sat untouched, past the television that still displayed the graph of Brad's gambling debts, past the photos on the wall of my wife Sarah. I watched them go. Brad walked with his head down, staring at his feet. But Chloe looked at every face she passed. She looked at Martha. She looked at my old foreman. She looked at the neighbors. She was looking for one person, one single person who would look back with sympathy. She found none. Every face was a stone wall. Every set of eyes was a mirror reflecting her own greed back at her. They reached the front door. The officer pushed it open. The night air rushed in. But it wasn't dark outside. The street was ablaze. 3 police cruisers were parked at jagged angles in front of my house, their light bars spinning frantically. Red, blue, red, blue. The strobe lights cut through the darkness, painting the oak trees on the lawn in violent flashes of color. It looked like a disco for the damned. But the lights weren't the only thing out there. The neighborhood had come out. Mrs. Higgins from next door was standing by her hedge, clutching her robe tight around her throat. The kids down the street who usually rode their bikes on my sidewalk were standing in a silent row holding their phones up filming. The man who walks his dog at midnight was there, the dog sitting obediently at his feet. They all watched. They watched as Brad Patterson, the man who drove a leased BMW and wore Italian suits, was dragged down the steps in handcuffs, his face stained blue, his expensive shoes scuffing on the concrete. They watched as Chloe Coleman, the woman who bragged about her interior design business, was led out barefoot, sobbing broken. I stepped out onto the porch. I needed to see this. I needed to witness the extraction of the poison. The officer leading Brad stopped at the bottom of the stairs to adjust his grip. Brad was stumbling. "Wait!" I called out. My voice carried over the sound of the idling engines and the crackle of the police radios. The officer stopped. He looked back at me. Brad looked back too. For a second, a flicker of hope crossed his face. Maybe he thought I was going to drop the charges. Maybe he thought I was going to show mercy. I walked down one step. I pointed a finger at Brad's chest. "Officer," I said, loud enough for Mrs. Higgins to hear, loud enough for the camera phones to pick up. "Check his front shirt pocket." The officer frowned. He reached out and patted Brad's chest. He felt something. He reached in. He pulled out a pair of white earbuds. Brad had grabbed them. In the chaos when he lunged for me, he must have snatched them off the table, thinking he could crush them, thinking he could destroy the evidence. He had stuffed them in his pocket. "That is state's evidence," I said, my voice cold as winter. "An officer, be careful with them." I leaned in close to Brad. I looked him right in the eye. I wanted him to remember this face. I wanted him to remember the face of the man he tried to erase. "The battery is low," I said. "It has been transmitting a lot of data lately." The officer bagged the earbuds. He shoved Brad toward the back of the cruiser. The darker one pushed his head down to clear the door frame. Brad didn't say anything. He just slumped into the plastic seat. The door slammed shut. It was a heavy, final sound, like a vault closing. They put Chloe in the other car. She was still crying, but it was softer now. A broken rhythm. She pressed her face against the window, looking out at the house she had grown up in. She looked at me standing on the porch. I didn't wave. I didn't turn away. I just stood there. A witness. The engines revved. The sirens chirped once, a sharp warning sound. The cruisers pulled away. The red and blue lights swept across the front of my house one last time, illuminating the brickwork, illuminating the well-tended lawn, illuminating the old man standing alone on his porch. Then they turned the corner and were gone. The street went quiet. The show was over. Mrs. Higgins looked at me across the hedge. She hesitated. She didn't know what to say. "What do you say to a man who just sent his whole family to prison?" I nodded to her. Just a small dip of the chin. "Good night, Mrs. Higgins," I said. "Good night, Mr. Coleman," she whispered back. I turned around and looked at my front door. It was open. The warm yellow light from the hallway spilled out onto the concrete. Inside my house was a mess. There was blue dye on the floor. There were police boot prints on the rug. There were half-eaten ribs on paper plates. But it was my house. It was my fortress. And for the first time in a long time, the drawbridge was up and the enemy was outside. I walked back up the steps. My knees hurt. My back ached. I was 70 years old and I was tired. But as I crossed the threshold, as I walked back into the light, I felt lighter than air. I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. The next morning, I woke up in a house that felt like a crime scene. Because it was. The police tape was gone, but the energy remained. The air felt heavy and stagnant, like the air in a room where someone has died and nobody has opened a window yet. I walked downstairs in my bathrobe. I avoided looking at the living room where the empty chairs stood like tombstones in a graveyard. I went straight to the spot where Brad had fallen. There was a blue stain on the oak floor, a dark, jagged splatter of methyl violet dye. I got a bucket of bleach and a wire brush. I got down on my hands and knees. My joints popped and my back complained, but I scrubbed. I scrubbed until my knuckles turned white and the fumes made my eyes water. The stain didn't move. It didn't fade. It had soaked deep into the grain of the wood. It had become part of the house. I sat back on my heels, staring at that blue mark. In that moment, I knew. I couldn't live here anymore. Brad and Chloe had wanted this house so badly. They had lied for it. They had stolen for it. They had plotted murder for it. To them, it was a pile of money shaped like bricks. To me, it had been a home. But now, looking at that stain, I realized they had managed to destroy it without even knocking down a wall. They had infected it. Every room held a memory of a lie. The kitchen where I faked the phone calls. The basement where I set the trap. The bathroom where the pills were swapped. This wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It was a monument to their betrayal. I stood up. I left the bucket right there in the middle of the floor. I went to the phone. I didn't call a cleaning crew. I called Solomon. "I need you to come over, Saul," I said. "And bring the red pen. We have surgery to do." Solomon arrived an hour later. He didn't ask about the bleach bucket. He sat at the dining table, opening his briefcase with the precision of a surgeon. He laid out the documents. The last will and testament of Booker T. Coleman. It was a thick document. I had updated it 5 years ago. It left the house to Chloe. It left my savings to Chloe. It left my pension benefits to Chloe. It was a document written by a father who loved his daughter. I picked it up. The paper felt heavy. Solomon handed me a shredder. A portable one he kept in his bag for moments exactly like this. "Do it, Booker," he said softy. I didn't hesitate. I fed the pages into the machine. Whir, crunch. Page 1, the house, gone. Page 2, the savings, gone. Page 3, the future I had built for her, gone. We watched the white strips of paper fill the bin. It was the sound of a legacy being deleted. "Now," Solomon said, pulling out a fresh legal pad, "we start from scratch. Who gets it, Booker?" I looked out the window at the garden Sarah had planted. "Nobody," I said. Solomon looked up over his spectacles. "Nobody," he repeated. "I worked 40 years for this money, Saul. I broke my back on that loading dock. I ate tuna sandwiches for lunch so I could save for a future that just tried to kill me." I leaned forward. "I am going to spend it. I am going to spend every single dime, and whatever is left when I die goes to the United Negro College Fund and the local animal shelter. At least the dogs will be loyal." Solomon smiled. He started writing. "And Chloe," he asked, "we need to be specific. If we just leave her out, she can contest it. She can say you forgot her. She can claim dementia again." I thought about that. I thought about the woman sobbing on my floor, not because she was sorry, but because she got caught. "Write this down," I commanded. "I, Booker T. Coleman, being of sound mind and body, hereby intentionally make no provision for my stepdaughter Chloe Patterson. This is not an oversight. This is a direct reflection of her actions on July 14th. She is to receive nothing. Not my money, not my personal effects, not even the photos of her mother." Solomon wrote it down. His pen scratched loudly against the paper. It was a harsh final sound. Now about the house, Solomon said, looking around. It is a crime scene technically, but the market is hot. Sell it, I said immediately. You want to list it? Solomon asked. We can get it cleaned up. Sand the floors, paint the walls, maybe in a month. No, I interrupted. Today. Call the investors, call the flippers, call the sharks Brad used to work with. I don't care about the price. I want to be out of here in 48 hours. I want to walk out with a suitcase and never look back. Solomon nodded. He made a call. By noon, 3 men in expensive suits were walking through my house. They stepped over the bleach bucket. They looked at the blue stain and frowned. I will give you $300,000 as is, one of them said. Cash. Close tomorrow. The house was worth $500. Brad knew that. I knew that. Done, I said. The man looked surprised. He thought I would haggle. He thought I was attached. He didn't understand. I wasn't selling a house. I was buying my freedom. And $200,000 was a small price to pay to wash the taste of this place out of my mouth. We signed the papers on the kitchen counter, the same counter where Chloe had sat and told me I was losing my mind. By 4 o'clock, the sold sign was up in the yard. I started packing. I didn't take much. I took my clothes. I took my jazz records. I took the flag from my service in Vietnam. And I took every single photo of Sarah. I left the furniture. I left the television. I left the dishes. I left the bed where I had slept for 30 years. I wanted nothing that they had touched. I wanted nothing that they had looked at with greedy eyes. The next morning, a moving truck came for the boxes. I walked through the empty rooms one last time. The house echoed with my footsteps. It sounded hollow. It sounded dead. I stood in the hallway and looked at the blue stain one last time. You can have it, Brad, I whispered. You wanted the house so bad. Now your mark is on it forever. But I am not. I walked out the front door and locked it. I dropped the keys in the mailbox. I got in my truck and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I drove north, toward the lake, toward the skyline that rose like a jagged glass mountain range against the blue sky. I pulled up to a building that looked like a spaceship. The Millennium Tower, glass, steel, doormen in uniforms. I walked into the lobby. It smelled of fresh lilies and expensive marble. It was cold. It was impersonal. It was perfect. I want the penthouse I had told the leasing agent yesterday. But Mr. Coleman, she had stammered, it is $6,000 a month. I have the money I had said, showing her the bank transfer from the house sale, and I want security. I want a building where nobody gets in unless I say so. I want a building where if someone tries to duplicate a key, the alarm goes off. Now I stood in the elevator watching the numbers climb. 10, 20, 30. The doors opened on the 35th floor. My new apartment was nothing like the old house. It was open concept, floor-to-ceiling windows, white walls, modern furniture that looked like art. I walked to the window. Lake Michigan stretched out before me, a vast sheet of blue water that went on forever. I looked down. The cars looked like ants. The people were invisible. I was safe. High above the rats, high above the schemes. I sat down on the white leather sofa. It was stiff. It wasn't comfortable yet, but it was mine. I pulled out my phone, a new phone. I had thrown the old one in the trash can at the lawyer's office. I opened the browser. I typed in a website I had looked at 1,000 times but never clicked. Global Odyssey Travel. Sarah and I used to talk about it. When we retire Booker, she would say, "We will go to Paris. We will eat croissants by the Seine. We will go to Tokyo and see the cherry blossoms. We will go to Rome and throw a coin in the fountain." But we never went. The roof needed fixing. The car broke down. Chloe needed tuition. There was always a reason to wait. I looked at the screen. World cruise. 180 days, 7 continents. The price was astronomical. It was the price of a luxury car. I thought about Brad sitting in a jail cell right now eating a bologna sandwich. I thought about Chloe trying to explain to a public defender why she bought spy equipment. They had wanted my money to buy things that would make them look rich. I was going to use the money to become rich in experience. I clicked Book Now. I entered my credit card information. I clicked Confirm. Payment successful. I sat there in the silence of my glass castle high above the city. I closed my eyes and I could almost feel Sarah sitting next to me. "We are going, baby," I whispered. "We are finally going." I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't a lonely old man trapped in a house full of ghosts. I was Booker Coleman, world traveler, survivor. I stood up and went to the unpacked box of records. I pulled out my favorite Coltrane album. I didn't have a record player yet. I would buy the best one money could buy tomorrow. For now, I just held the record. I looked at the cover art, a love supreme. Yes, it was. I had cut out the cancer. I had cauterized the wound. And now, for the first time in my life, I was going to live entirely for myself. I looked at the blue horizon of the lake. Paris was waiting. The Cook County Jail is a gray place. It is not just the color of the walls or the color of the floors. It is the color of the air itself. It smells of industrial cleaner and stale sweat and the heavy metallic taste of hopelessness. I walked through the security checkpoint with the same slow, deliberate gait I used to walk the warehouse floor. I put my belt in the plastic bin. I took off my watch. I walked through the metal detector. I did not have to come here. Solomon told me not to come. He said there was nothing left to say. He said that legal papers speak louder than words, and the papers had already been filed. But Solomon is a lawyer. He thinks in terms of statutes and precedents. I am a father. And a father does not close the book on 40 years of life without reading the final page. I sat in the visitation booth. It was a long row of stools bolted to the floor facing a thick pane of plexiglass that was scratched and clouded by thousands of desperate conversations. I waited. 10 minutes later, the heavy steel door on the other side buzzed. Chloe walked in. I almost did not recognize her. The woman who had stood in my living room 3 days ago wearing a white dress and diamonds was gone. In her place was a woman in a baggy orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion. Her hair, which she used to spend hundreds of dollars highlighting, was pulled back in a messy knot. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing dark circles under her eyes and a rash on her neck from stress. She sat down. She did not look at me. She looked at the handcuffs attached to the metal loop on the table. I picked up the black plastic phone on my side of the glass. I waited. She stared at the phone for a long time. I could see the anger radiating off her. It was not regret, it was not sorrow, it was a burning, radioactive anger. Finally, she snatched the phone up. "Are you happy now?" she asked. Her voice was tinny through the receiver, but the venom was clear. "You came all the way down here to gloat. You want to see me in orange. Is that it? Does it make you feel big?" I looked at her through the scratched glass. I looked for the little girl who used to wait for me by the door when I came home from the night shift. I looked for the teenager who cried when her first boyfriend broke up with her. I looked for the woman I had walked down the aisle. I could not find them. They were buried under layers of greed and entitlement. "I am not happy, Chloe," I said quietly. "No father is happy to see his child in a cage." "Then get me out," she hissed. She leaned forward, her eyes wild. "You can drop the charges. You can tell the prosecutor it was a misunderstanding. You can tell them you gave us permission to sell the house. If you do that, they will let me go. I will leave Chicago. You will never see me again, I promise." I listened to her bargain. She was still trying to make a deal. She still thought everything was a transaction. "I cannot do that," I said. "Why not?" she screamed. She slammed her hand against the glass. The guard in the corner took a step forward, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Why not?" "Because you are heartless. That is why. You have always been heartless. You care more about your stupid rules and your pride than you care about your own flesh and blood." She was crying now, but they were angry tears. "You are a cruel old man," she spat. "You set us up. You let us walk into that trap. You could have stopped us. You could have just told us you knew, but no. You had to humiliate us. You had to destroy us publicly. What kind of father does that?" I sat there and let her words wash over me. They did not hurt anymore. They were like rain hitting a window pane, cold but unable to touch me. I waited until she was finished. I waited until she ran out of breath and slumped back in her chair, panting. "Are you done?" I asked. She glared at me. "I am not cruel, Chloe," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I am a logistics man. That is who I am. That is who I have always been." I leaned closer to the glass. "For 40 years I managed a warehouse. It is a simple job, but it teaches you about the nature of things. In a warehouse, you have inventory, you have assets, you have things that have value." I paused, letting her hear the rhythm of my voice, the voice that used to command 200 men. "But sometimes you find a shipment that is bad. Maybe it got wet. Maybe the expiration date passed. Or maybe it was toxic from the start." Chloe looked away, refusing to meet my eyes, but I knew she was listening. "When you find that bad inventory, you have a choice." I continued. "You can ignore it. You can leave it on the shelf next to the good products. You can hope that maybe it is not that bad. You can hope that maybe if you ignore it, the rot will go away. I shook my head slowly. But the rot never goes away, Chloe. It spreads. If you leave a crate of rotting fruit next to the fresh ones by morning, the whole row is spoiled. If you leave a leaking battery next to the electronics, the acid eats through everything. I took a deep breath. This was the hardest thing I had ever had to say. When a manager finds a toxic shipment, he does not cry over it. He does not try to negotiate with it. He follows protocol. He isolates it. He removes it, and he destroys it. I looked at her in her orange jumpsuit. He destroys it not because he hates the shipment, but because he has a duty to protect the rest of the warehouse. Chloe looked at me then. Her mouth fell open slightly. The realization hit her like a physical blow. I am the warehouse, Chloe, I said softly. My life, my peace, my remaining years. That is the inventory. And for a long time I let you stay on the shelf because you were family. I ignored the leaks. I ignored the smell of the rot. Because I loved you. I gripped the phone tighter. But 3 days ago, I looked at the manifest, and I realized that you were not just damaged goods. You were poison. You were willing to kill me for a paycheck. You were willing to erase my mind for a condo. You are the toxic shipment, Chloe. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, and I did what any good manager would do. I wrote you off. I removed you from the inventory. She stared at me. The anger in her eyes was replaced by shock. For the first time, she realized that I was not punishing her. I was simply cleaning up. I was processing a loss. You can't mean that, she whispered. I am your daughter. I stood up. My knees felt strong. My back felt straight. You were my daughter, I corrected her. Now you are just a lesson in loss prevention. I hung up the phone. I did not wait for her to respond. I did not wait for the tears or the screaming or the begging. I turned my back on the glass. I signaled to the guard that I was done. I walked out of the visitation room. I heard a faint thud against the glass behind me, but I did not look back. You do not look back at the trash after you take it to the curb. I walked through the long gray corridors. I walked past the security checkpoint. I walked out the heavy steel doors and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the parking lot. The air outside tasted sweet. It smelled of gasoline and hot asphalt and freedom. I reached into my pocket. My hand closed around a small white plastic object. It was the charging case for the earbuds. The police had kept the buds themselves as evidence of the wiretap, but they had returned the case to me with my other personal effects. It was empty now, a hollow shell. I looked at it. It was sleek and smooth and designed to look perfect, just like the lie Chloe had tried to sell me. I walked over to a metal trash can near the bus stop. I did not throw it with anger. I did not spike it like a football. I just opened my hand. The case fell. It hit the pile of garbage with a dull, unceremonious thud. It landed next to a crushed soda can and a discarded newspaper. It belonged there. I adjusted my jacket. I checked my watch. I had a meeting with a travel agent in 2 hours. I had a plane ticket to book. I walked toward my truck. I started to hum a little tune. It was an old jazz standard. On the sunny side of the street. I was 70 years old. I was alone. And I had never felt more complete. The inventory was clean. The books were balanced. And the warehouse was finally closed for business. I got in the truck and drove away, leaving the gray walls of the prison in my rearview mirror shrinking smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely into the horizon. 6 months is a long time in the life of a man. In 6 months, a season changes. In 6 months, a warehouse can ship 50,000 units. And in 6 months, a man can walk out of a prison of his own making and step onto a beach on the other side of the world. The air here in Bali is thick. It tastes of salt and frangipani flowers and charcoal smoke from the satay grills down the beach. It is humid, the kind of heat that wraps around you like a heavy blanket. But for the first time in years, the weight on my shoulders feels comforting instead of crushing. I am sitting on the terrace of a small villa in Seminyak. The sun is beginning its slow descent into the Indian Ocean, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and burnt orange. It is a messy, chaotic, beautiful sunset, the kind you never see in Chicago because the skyscrapers block the horizon. I reach up and adjust the headphones on my ears. They are not white plastic. They are not small. They are large over-ear headphones made of mahogany wood and soft leather. They are German engineering at its finest. They cost me $600 and they were the first thing I bought when I landed. There is no microphone in them. There is no GPS tracker. There is no battery-draining software sending my location to a greedy relative. There is only John Coltrane. I close my eyes and let the saxophone wash over me. It is pure. It is private. For 3 months in Chicago, I was afraid to speak in my own home. I was afraid to hum a tune. I was afraid that every sound I made was being cataloged and used to build a coffin for my freedom. Now the only person listening to me is me. I take the headphones off and let them rest around my neck. The sound of the ocean rushes in to replace the jazz. It is a roar, constant and indifferent. The ocean doesn't care if you are rich. It doesn't care if you are old. It doesn't care if your daughter is sitting in a cell in Illinois wearing an orange jumpsuit. I pick up my tablet. It is a new one. I left the old Samsung in the trash back in the States. I have an email from Solomon, subject update on the Patterson case. I open it. It is brief. Solomon knows I don't want the details. Booker. The plea deals were finalized yesterday. Brad accepted 4 years for the burglary and the attempted aggravated battery. Chloe took 3 years for the wiretapping and conspiracy. They will be eligible for parole in 18 months. The house closing was final. The funds are in your trust. Enjoy the beach. I look at the words, 4 years, 3 years. It seems like such a small number for the amount of damage they tried to do. How do you quantify the crime of stealing a father's trust? How do you put a number on the act of convincing a man he is losing his mind? But then I look at the waves crashing against the sand. It doesn't matter. If they had gotten 10 years or 20 or life, it would not change the past, and it does not change my present. They are in a cage of concrete and steel. I am in a world of water and light. I put the tablet down, face down. I don't need to read it again. That chapter is closed. The manifest is filed. The shipment is gone. A shadow falls across my table. Mind if I join you, Booker? I look up. It is Hans. He is a retired architect from Rotterdam. We met 2 weeks ago at the hotel bar. He is 72. He has a bad hip and a laugh that sounds like a diesel engine starting up. Please, Hans, I say, gesturing to the empty chair. Hans sits down with a groan. He signals the waiter for 2 Bintang beers. You look serious today, my friend, Hans says, lighting a clove cigarette. Thinking about the business again. No, I say, thinking about the lack of it. Hans knows nothing about the wiretap. He knows nothing about the sugar pills or the blue dye or the police raid. He knows me as Booker, the man who knows a lot about logistics and jazz. He likes me because I play a decent game of chess, and I don't talk while he is thinking. That is a strange thing to be liked for who you are. Chloe told me I would be lonely. That was her biggest weapon. She wielded the fear of loneliness like a knife. You can't live alone, Dad. You need us. You will die in that big house by yourself. She was right about one thing. The house was lonely. But it wasn't the empty rooms that made it lonely. It was the people in them. There is a difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone is a physical state. It is quiet. It is peaceful. It is having the bed to yourself and eating breakfast when you want. Loneliness is different. Loneliness is sitting in a room full of people who share your blood but not your heart. Loneliness is looking into your daughter's eyes and seeing a calculator instead of a soul. Loneliness is the constant gnawing suspicion that the love you are receiving is a transaction. I look at Hans. He is talking about the structural integrity of the local temples. He is passionate. He is interesting. I am not lonely. I have met more people in these last 6 months than I met in the last 10 years in Chicago. I have met a chef from Peru who taught me how to make ceviche. I have met a widow from Japan who showed me how to fold paper cranes. I have met backpackers who are younger than my granddaughter who treat me with more respect in 5 minutes than Brad treated me in 5 years. They don't want my money, they don't want my house. They just want to share a sunset and a story. The waiter brings the beers. The bottles are cold and sweating in the heat. To the good life, Hans says, raising his bottle. To the truthful life, I correct him. We clink bottles. The glass rings out. A pure sound. I take a drink. The beer is cold and sharp. I think about the sugar pills. I think about the sweetness that was supposed to kill me. Now I only taste the bitterness of the hops and the salt of the air, and it tastes like life. I look out at the horizon. The sun is half gone now, drowning in the water. The sky is a bruise of purple and black. I am 70 years old. According to the actuaries, according to the doctors, according to society, I am in the twilight. I am supposed to be winding down. I am supposed to be sitting in a recliner safe and quiet waiting for the end. But looking at this ocean, I don't feel like I am ending. I feel like I am just getting started. I have a ticket in my email for Tokyo next month. After that, maybe Rome, maybe Cape Town. I have the money, I have the time, and most importantly, I have the clarity. I realized that for 40 years, I was carrying a heavy load. I was carrying the expectations of being a provider. I was carrying the guilt of a husband who couldn't save his wife. I was carrying the duty of a father who tried to save his daughter. I put the load down, and I am not picking it back up. I touch the headphones around my neck again. The leather is warm from my skin. I remember the moment in the visitation room, the look on Chloe's face when I told her she was toxic inventory. It was harsh, maybe the harshest thing I have ever done. But a surgeon cuts to cure. A fire burns to clear the forest for new growth. I am the new growth. I watch the last sliver of the sun disappear. The darkness rushes in, but the villa lights flick on warm and golden. I am not afraid of the dark anymore. I know what hides in it, and I know how to turn on the lights. Hans laughs at his own joke. I laugh with him. It feels good to laugh. It feels good to trust the person sitting next to you. I pick up my phone. I open the camera. I take a picture of the empty beer bottle and the darkening sky. I don't send it to anyone. I don't post it. I just keep it. For me. Because for the first time in my life, this moment, this money, this peace belongs to no one else. I am Booker Coleman. I am alive. And I am finally truly free. The lesson. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes blood is just the medium for a parasite to travel. My 70 years taught me that age does not strip a man of his dignity, only those around him try to. I learned that trust is not a gift you give freely to family. It is a privilege they must earn. Silence is not weakness. It is the loudest alarm bell you can ring. When you discover the snakes in your garden, don't just cut the grass. Burn the field, salt the earth, and plant something beautiful on the ashes. That is the only way to truly find peace. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us share more stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what would you have done if you found those earbuds? I read every single comment. Until next time, stay sharp and trust your gut.